more serious.
All right,
Are you talking about the felons, the leakers then? I agree.
We're going to hit pause for one moment on this, one moment on this conversation, because I just want to keep, updating on our other breaking news story, which of course is in the UK. Police confirming multiple fatalities. We understand there was a blast at an Ariana Grande concert at one of the biggest arenas in the UK, up to 20,000 people. This is video from inside that arena. You can see people running for the exits. You hear the screams. Many teenagers there, teenagers with their parents. Witnesses telling CNN there were multiple on the ground injured. We just spoke with a witness who told us he saw several on the ground injured. And police, of course, telling people now to stay away from that arena. Phil Black is covering the breaking news live in London. Phil, obviously, every moment here, police desperately trying to figure out what happened. We're trying to understand the motive here, if that's the right word to use. And, of course, to understand what happened here with fatalities. What are you able to tell us?
Yeah, we still, crucially, Aaron, do not know precisely what triggered this stampede-like scenes that we're seeing in the video that was recorded by terrified people as they were trying to escape Manchester Arena. Something has triggered that crush, that desperate need and terror to escape that venue en masse. And so as a result, well, you can hear it, you can see it. We're talking about around 20,000 people who were trapped in this, almost certainly vastly young people, teenagers, Ariana Grande fans. Something has happened that has triggered that sort of fear and panic. Reports from the scene, witnesses are talking about some sort of loud blast, possibly a series of blasts. But so far the police are not confirming that. They're talking about reports of an explosion. Their priority now is getting help to the people who need it so desperately. It is very likely from those scenes that we are seeing that, well, we know that people have been killed because the police have confirmed fatalities, but we don't know the numbers. But you can imagine from that crush-like scenario within that huge venue, everyone fearful and trying to exit there at once, it is very likely that people have been hurt. And crucially, we don't know how the fatalities have taken place, whether it is as a result of these reported explosions or in the crush, the stampede that followed. We're expecting more updates from the police shortly. But they've already given us the worst. This was a terrifying, deadly event. There have been fatalities. We're just waiting to hear how bad this was. Aaron.
And let me just ask you, Phil, at this time, what they're trying to just figure out the forensics here of what the explosion might have been, but we don't even know at this point what that was, right? I mean, obviously the first thing people think of when you think of Paris, you think of something like this, people think of terror. Obviously we have in no way, shape or form at this moment any way to know if that's the case.
That's absolutely correct. I think it's very likely from the witness accounts that there was a blast of some kind, possibly two, as in a loud bang, a loud noise, something that triggered the fear, but we don't know the point of origin of that noise. And of course, these sorts of venues, these sorts of events, well, the security is incredibly tight. They're usually incredibly well organized. Both police and private security are usually used to manage crowds like this coming and going. Of course, bag searches take place. It's not a soft target in that sense if we're talking about the potential for some sort of terror-like event to have taken place here. So it's important to remember we don't know what caused this, but we know the result. The result is around 20,000 people desperately scrambling to escape this venue en masse. It is a terrifying, fearful stampede-like scenario, and almost certainly they were all young people and children.
All right, Phil Black, thank you very much. As police there are trying to get answers, I want to go to Kiara Dauber. She was inside that arena, saw the explosion. Kiara, what did you see?
Yeah, they just started letting everyone out. The music had just gone off. There was a massive, massive explosion. There was a bang. There was smoke coming up. Sorry, excuse me. There was smoke coming like up through the steps, and everyone was just screaming and shouting, saying that it could be a bomb. And there was people shouting for the kids. There was people shouting for the other half, trying to find people. And as we went out into the concourse, like to get out of the arena, there was just bodies scattered about everywhere. And there was just blood and people's belongings on the floor. And we just ran. There was all the traffic was at a standstill, and we were just running through the roads. And it was just chaos. It was just...
Kiara, I'm so sorry. I know that you haven't even had a moment to process this, and you're coming on to share this. I appreciate that. so much. When you walked through those tunnels, you're saying you saw a lot of people who were lying down.
Yeah, there was at least 20, 30 people on the floor. Some that you could see straight off were just dead. You could just see that they were just passed away. There was some people with injuries. There was a few, like, there was a guy, or there was a husband that holding, like, what looked like his wife, and she wasn't in a good state.
And from where you were, Kiara, those people, could you tell sort of, did it look like it had happened sort of in the stampede, or was this near where the explosion may have happened? Were you even able to tell as you went by?
There was blood everywhere. It wasn't in the stampede because there wasn't that many people out at that minute. It was just as we opened the door to get out of the arena, as they were letting people out.
And there was blood.
Yeah, there was blood, and people's shoes and handbags and bits of food and phones, and it was just mad. It was just crazy.
And Kiara, was the people you were with, are they all safe?
Yeah, we're all safe. It's just a bit shook up at the minute. I don't think I'll ever get rid of the images.
Kiara, thank you so very much. I'm sorry. I know this is so hard. I am so glad for you that you're okay, but I know that at this moment is a mixed blessing as you think about what you have seen. Thank you so much for telling us about it.
You're welcome. I'm just hoping that everyone finds who they were with, and that everyone. I just feel so sorry for the fatalities and the families of those affected.
All right, Kiara, thank you again so very much. I want to bring in now retired Army Major General Spider Marks, and I'm going to bring the rest of our panel in a moment on the other breaking news. But Spider, first, if I could just get your reaction to what we're learning here is happening in Manchester. You just heard Kiara there, who very bravely came on and spoke about what she saw, saying something that adds quite a bit to this very much a developing story. She says she saw 20 or 30 bodies on the floor of people that she believes were dead. She says that there was blood everywhere, all of their belongings. It didn't appear to her that this had happened in a stampede, but it's unclear at this time what this explosion might have been. When you listen to what she had to say, what's your takeaway about what is happening right now in the UK?
Well, clearly, Aaron, the immediate feed that we're all getting from CNN and other media outlets is clearly a scene of incredible destruction. I think all of the evidence will come out. The forensics will be extremely well done, but you have to start with a going-in proposition and assume the very worst with this. You have to assume that there's some degree of inspiration for this type of an event. Let's assume and let's discount, although that will happen through forensics, that this was an accident, this was gas that was released, this was spontaneous combustion of some sort. Let's assume that this was planned, that there were events leading up to this, and again, law enforcement will uncover all of this and we'll figure out where this goes. There has to be a very objective, as there is in circumstances like this, there will be a very objective view of what took place. In the totality of what has happened in Great Britain here over the course of the last month and a half, going back to the incident that occurred right outside Parliament, this is a concern that obviously this government wants to get its arms around, which then will lead to where we are with the vote that's coming up for Theresa May and her party. Yeah. What does Brexit look like? So you take the totality of all of this. This is an incident. It's horrible. We'll get to the bottom of it. Then you look at the different discourses that will be coming forward in terms of where we are in terms of security in Great Britain specifically and in Europe, and then all this radical terrorism that we see.
All right. Well, obviously it is the middle of the night in the UK. That does not stop the news here from breaking. We're going to continue to bring witnesses to you. We're going to continue to bring you more of the breaking news. But you just heard Kiara Dauber, who was there, just tell us as she was leaving the concert, she saw 20 or 30 bodies on the floor, and she said to her they were all clearly dead. There was blood everywhere. Calvin Wellsford joins me now. He was in the front row of the concert. Calvin, thank you very much for coming on and doing this. I know it's incredibly difficult, but you are the ones who are enabling us all to understand what just happened here. What did you see?
So I was front row at the concert, and I heard a big bang. I don't know what it was, but I guess it was a bomb or a gun of some sort. And I turned around to see all of the crowd completely running and flying towards the stage where I was, because I was front row. And as I was there, I panicked and started to have an asthma attack and cry and scream. And I saw Ariana Grande's mum and her best friend run backstage, and a few other people just ran backstage because that was the exit. That was our nearest place to go without going up the steps. So I ran because I thought, if I'm not in cover, I'll be safer. And I was taken in by one of her security people who asked if I was okay and wasn't really aware of what was happening. I explained to her that I heard a sound which was like a bomb, and that everyone was running and crying, and she took my arm and took me aside and asked if I was okay, and then gave me to other security people who took me out of the thing, and then I ran.
And Calvin, we were just speaking to someone else who was there who said she had seen 20 or 30 bodies on the floor. Did you see anything like that?
I can't really remember. I completely blanked, and my thing was run. In my head, I was like, I need to get as far away as I can, and I completely blanked. I can't even remember anything after getting out of that arena.
All right, Calvin, thank you very much. Again, thank you for coming on. I know you're in shock, as so many others are. We continue our coverage here of this story. Dan Senor also joins us, spent time in Iraq, of course, and advising Mitt Romney as well. Dan, you know, when you look at something like this happening in the UK, and there are still so many details we don't know, right? These are just a few eyewitness accounts that we are putting together from people who are very much in shock. But you just heard that woman say 20 or 30 bodies. She saw a lot of blood. We just don't know at this point, but what we're hearing is horrific.
Right. So the human catastrophe of it, just in its raw form that we're hearing about and seeing images of, makes it hard to analyze these things. We hope it was not a terrorist attack.
Right.
Actually, we hope if something exploded and people panic, God forbid,
right.
And that's. But
exactly.
It tells you a lot about the climate in which we are in today. That something like this happens in Europe. 10, 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have, our minds wouldn't have immediately gone to a terrorist attack between France and Brussels and all these terrorist, UK, these terrorist attacks have been going on around the region, and this constant focus in political environments over the last several years on the 2+ million refugees that have come, into Europe via Germany, and now many of them have spread throughout Europe. Mm-hmm. and established or inserted themselves into communities that create infrastructure for terror. Whether that is this or not, that is where people's minds go. And as Spider said earlier, Theresa May's got an election coming up in a couple of weeks. She was the Home Secretary under Prime Minister Cameron. She was the equivalent of the Secretary of Homeland Security. She's regarded in the UK as having the strong Homeland Security credentials. Immediately, these sorts of issues and various political leaders' credibility on them become a major factor.
So these, I just want to, everyone, as we're getting some new images here, these are the first images I'm going to show you right now coming in. These are still photos of some of the injured, as you can see. And General Marks, let me ask you, from what we're hearing from our witness, when she says 20 or 30 people, again, she says they were all clearly dead from what she could see. We have absolutely no idea at this point of the number of fatalities, although we do know there are fatalities. When she says there was blood everywhere, in your mind, does that make you think one thing versus another, or is that something that could easily have happened in a stampede that would have occurred for any reason?
No, I think what this leads you to, at least initially, the reports that we're getting out of the two eyewitnesses that you were able to bring on, is that it leads us to at least to an immediate thought that this was a single incident that occurred. There was an explosion of some sort. As Dan indicated, we don't know exactly what that is. Yeah. But that explosion then caused some immediate panic and immediate deaths, a bunch of destruction within a controlled area, and then you get the exits that are now being overwhelmed by humanity trying to get out of there. I think what you're looking at is too early to tell whether it's an act of terrorism, but it was some explosion that occurred. We'll figure out what that looks like. but I don't think this occurred in multiple locations. It wasn't synchronized where you had multiple attacks in multiple locations within that very enclosed arena.
No, it doesn't. At this point, you know, there had been some reports. It's all eyewitness at this point because we don't yet know, but of multiple explosions. But our eyewitnesses have only each spoken of hearing one. So for what that's worth, John, though, when you talk about this is one of the largest arenas in the UK. 20,000 people. It can fit 20,000. But a lot of the people who were there tonight, kids, teenagers, and particularly teenage girls here for this concert.
And that's what makes this especially horrific as we find out what the details are. The fact that so many teenagers and families were caught up in this is what makes it so especially horrific. You know, Manchester is a music mecca in England. It is, it is a city with a great music culture. And obviously the UK has dealt with terrorism going back to the days of the IRA. But as we get more information, the first thing is just the prayers we must all give out to the families and the teenagers and the children who may have been affected and caught up in this horrific event tonight.
And Dan, I think what you're raising here is whatever the cause may have been, is that now the first assumption is that something like this happened. And that's part of the reason people would have reacted the way they did. You know, someone who was on the show earlier who was there said, well, when I first heard it, there's a lot of big bangs at something like this. I may not have thought something of it. But then I did because of what has happened.
Just look at the coverage last week in New York City when the driver drove into Times Square. And immediately, where does everybody go to? Terrorist attack. Because actually, in several parts of the world, including in Israel, this is a common terror tactic now. Driving into a crowd of people.
We've seen that across Europe as just an example. Yeah.
So you don't need a sophisticated bomb-making capability anymore. It could be something quite simple as driving into Times Square. Who knows if this is actually a terror attack? What sparked this? But I just think this is where we in sort of the West go immediately whenever there's an incident like this. And it's, you know, these are extremely turbulent times.
And you know, one of the mantras of Homeland Security in the United States, and I think around the world, is you hope for the best, you prepare for the worst. And I think that applies to tonight as well.
And General Marks, how quickly do you think we're going to know what happened here? Obviously, we're now in just about not even 1 hour since we first heard of this, just about 1 hour. It doesn't matter what time it is in the UK. They're working every second that they can. How quickly do you think we will know what this was, whether it was terror or just some horrible accident that caused stampedes?
Within 6 hours, I think we'll know more. The priorities of work right now will be to care for the wounded, keep those alive, isolate the dead. Let's be objective about this. Isolate the area so you can begin to build the forensics, make this thing as antiseptic as you can, and you start diving into it. So you'll have multiple teams that have rehearsed this over multiple times, unfortunately, that will be doing their tasks to ensure that within a short order of time, you at least have a sense of where you need to go to figure out how this thing occurred.
Dan.
And if it was a terror attack, they also have to keep an eye on what other public venues are potential targets and are vulnerable.
All of the above.
If there's, I mean, God forbid, if there's a sophisticated coordinated attack where you can hit multiple locations, they'll immediately keeping an eye on public transportation, any areas, venues that are highly concentrated with people. Whenever these attacks occur, if it is an attack, that's where law enforcement, Homeland Security, or the Home Office in the case of the UK goes.
Yeah, and I think, John, it's worth remembering because I remember that afternoon. I think so many do. When the Paris attacks happened, obviously it was evening there. It was afternoon here. It did take a little while, probably just about the time we've had now, maybe a little bit less if I recall. But it was very quickly that they knew that something horrible had happened. Obviously, the details, you know, took quite some time over the next few days to come out, but they knew it was terror.
Of course, and in that case, we had interconnected incidents, as Dan is expressing. You know, one of the telltale signs is if there are detonations at different exits, for example, or multiple incidents across the city. There does not seem to be that in this case at Manchester. That's important, but that was certainly one of the telltale signs that made it definitive in Paris.
And General Marks, that is, I think, very important at this hour. Again, there could be more, we don't know, but from what we're hearing from people who were there is that there was one very large explosion. But the operative word, at least from what these eyewitnesses are saying, is one.
Exactly. And what John just indicated is that we have, in this particular case, an adaptive threat. At Bataclan, what you had was folks with weapons, you had multiple explosions, etc. What you have here is obviously someone who learned from that and achieved an equal amount of destruction and the terror that individual wanted to put in place.
Yeah.
Again, we must assume that this is an act of terrorism, and then we'll take it from there because of the amount of resources that are available that go after something like this. We can back off if we find out that it's not. It's an accident. I doubt that.
All right, and as we get ready to hand it off, we have another eyewitness here just telling our show that he was there and heard 5 or 6 bangs. So as I said, very much piecing this together. It is very uncertain at this hour what it could have been, but this one's saying 5 or 6 bangs. Let's hand it off now for the continuing breaking news coverage with AC360.
And a good evening to you. We are in 2 places at once tonight, Washington, D.C. and Great Britain. There are reports of an explosion with injuries and fatalities at an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, England. Now, someone who was there telling the BBC it was bedlam, it was horrific. Also tonight, from here in Washington, a string of late and significant developments in the Russia collusion probe. We begin, though, with Manchester, being especially careful not to get ahead of the facts, which are terrible enough as they are at this point. And we want to point out there is probably more that we don't know than we do know right now. CNN's Phil Black joins us now with the very latest. So what have you learned about this incident? And again, I'm just giving our viewers a heads up. This is very early moments, and often the initial reporting is you know, it's from eyewitnesses and it's inaccurate, and there's a lot we don't know. So what have you learned, Phil?
Yeah, indeed, and Anderson, the police in Manchester are describing it as a significant incident. They had been careful in their language. They are saying that they are responding to reports of an explosion. But we know that it was deadly. We know that whatever has taken place there has claimed lives. Police say there are confirmed fatalities and other casualties as well. But we don't know the precise number. We can see from witness accounts, from video that has been posted to social media, what followed in the moments after, and that looks to have been a truly terrifying scene. Within this venue, some 20,000 people, almost certainly all young people, teenagers, perhaps children with parents, people who'd gone there to watch Ariana Grande perform that night, all of them screaming, desperately trying to escape this venue in a pretty uncontrolled way, something resembling a human crush. So it's also possible that people have been hurt in that sort of scenario as well. But what we've consistently heard from witnesses on the ground, at least one loud noise, a bang, a blast of some kind, and then that has triggered the fear and the frenzy that followed. At the moment, police are simply desperately trying to get to the scene and help the people who need it so urgently, and they're asking people to stay away from there as they get on top of this, work out what the cause was and precisely how many people have been hurt or worse as a result.
So, Phil, let me just a couple things. Do we know where this sound, whether it's a blast, a bang, I've heard it described in different ways, and again, we don't know what caused it. Do we know where in this arena it was? Because in the video, which is inside the arena where the concert is, it does not seem from the video that we've seen that there is any kind of a impact area from the video. Do we know, did it happen inside the arena or did it happen on the periphery?
You're right. The video doesn't show any sign of an explosion of any kind within the arena itself. CNN heard from a witness just a short time ago who says that he believes the blast came, or the loud noise came from just outside the arena, somewhere in the hallways just outside that people used to enter and exit the arena space itself. He spoke of that loud noise, one loud noise was what he heard, and in addition some smoke as well. So what we're hearing is that it may have taken place not within the arena itself, but just outside, and it seems to have taken place just moments after the concert finished.
So we should also point out, at a concert venue like this, often, especially in Great Britain, bags would be searched. So if it took place outside, one possibility would be that this occurred from someone who was trying to enter. But again, we just don't know at this point. But it's important to point, it does not seem that this occurred inside the arena with the pictures that we're looking at.
Indeed, from the pictures, what we've heard from a witness, it doesn't appear that it's taken place within the arena itself. That's what we've heard and understood so far. But of course, you're right in making the point. It's very early days in reporting this, so we do need to be careful. What we do know is that security at these venues for events like this, well, it is incredibly tight. There are bag searchers, there are private security guards at the main entrance to these venues, checking people, checking what they're carrying, in addition to police out on the streets as well, usually managing these crowds also. So it's not easy to get something into a venue like this, but all we can go by is what we've heard from witnesses at the scene so far who talk about at least one loud noise. It looks like it was just outside the arena venue itself, but what it has triggered is that wave of panic and fear as some 20,000 young people, mostly young people I would say, within that venue have desperately tried to get out and escape that space.
All right, Phil, stay with us. We're joined right now on the phone by CNN producer Zain Nabi, who is there. Zain, explain where you are and what you have learned thus far.
Hi, Anderson. Yes, I arrived onto the scene about approximately an hour after the incident. The police have a heavy presence outside the Manchester Arena. They've cordoned off the entire area, and they're obviously assessing what happened and how this reported explosion has taken place. To reiterate what Phil has said, the Greater Manchester Police are currently investigating. They have confirmed that there was an explosion, and this was at Ariana Grande's concert. There are fatalities. They have said there are a number of fatalities, but they have said they have not confirmed the exact number. We know there are serious injuries, and this is currently under investigation. I spoke to an eyewitness who was in the front row of the arena when the incident happened. He told me when it happened that there was a large explosion. It was at the end of the concert, and he actually suffered an asthma attack and was dragged onto stage by one of the security personnel and actually was rescued in that way. So we'll still wait on the facts to come in. There's still, the emergency services are reacting. And what they've also done is the local hotels around the arena, like the Holiday Inn, that's where families are encouraged to go to because young kids who are at this concert are being allowed to go in there. They're being taken in. And the Greater Manchester Police are in the process of setting up a line for people to call to get more information and, of course, to find out about any loved ones who might have been at the arena.
So, Zain, it's just past 1 a.m. there, about 1:06 in the morning. Do you know what time this incident occurred at?
Yes, the reports are that it happened around 10:55, 11 p.m. local. Of course, we'll only have those confirmed by the Greater Manchester Police at some point when they've conducted their investigations. There have been conflicting reports. Initially, there were concerns that there was gunfire and there were 2 explosions. What the police have said is that there was 1 explosion, there was 1 noise in the arena, and that has resulted in several, or, well, I can't give you a number because the police haven't given one, but there are numerous serious injuries, and they've also confirmed that there are fatalities. Again, we're waiting on the police to confirm how many that is.
Also, Zain, just to be clear, you were saying people are being encouraged to go to local hotels. I understand cabs are basically taking people for free out of the area because police want people to leave the area. If this was a smaller venue and an incident this like occurred, often the police would want to try to keep everybody somewhat nearby so they could interview people and see if there was anybody who was involved in this in any way who may still be there. But obviously, in an incident like this, with a venue of some 20,000 people, people have just people have fled in all directions, so that's not an option.
Yeah, I mean, police will do their best to gather as much information as they can. And, of course, we all know how vital it is in the early stages of any form of incident or attack that the right information is gathered from the eyewitnesses, from people who are on the ground. So as many people who are either being treated or either being put up in local hotels, the police are doing their best to get out and interview those people and try to get as much as crucial information as they can.
Shimon Prokupez joins us right now as well. Shimon, what are you learning?
So both Pamela Brown and I have been talking to U.S. officials since this has happened, some of which whom have been briefed on the investigation. What we're being told is they believe, at least they've been briefed by people at the scene, that there was an explosion that occurred outside the venue, which then possibly caused this stampede, this sort of rush of people out of the arena that may have caused some of these injuries. You know, officials, it's very preliminary and they're just starting to get some of the briefings, but it does appear there was an explosion. Obviously, as of right now, they're looking at maybe terrorism, but no one has definitively said what caused this. But they do believe there was an explosion, which then caused people to run out of the arena, which probably caused some of the fatal injuries.
So it's not clear when you say explosion outside the arena. There had been one eyewitness who'd said that possibly something near the box office, but it's not clear if actually it was kind of in the outer rim of the arena or out on the street. You're not sure.
That's exactly right, Anderson. So it could have been on the outer perimeter because, you know, you would think there'd be security and it'd be pretty difficult for someone to bring any kind of, you know, bomb or explosive material into the arena. So it looks like it was on the outer perimeter, and then that's what sort of caused the stampede, the rush. But again, you know, this is just happening, and a lot of the officials who are on scene are telling us that they're still trying to piece it all together, trying to figure out exactly what happened here.
Right, and given that this now has happened several hours ago, if this had been a blast inside that arena, not only in the video we're looking at right now, would we probably see some sort of an impact zone? Given that it's 20,000 people, many of whom are videotaping, particularly at the end of a concert, we would probably have video right now inside the arena if that is where this occurred. But given the fact that we have none of that video, we'll have to wait for CCTV images or anybody else who happened to be nearby to kind of, and investigators are no doubt searching for that video as well to kind of find out exactly what the cause of this explosion was.
Right, that's exactly right. You know, when I was looking through some of this video, that's exactly what I saw. I was just trying to figure out if this had occurred inside. You know, we probably would have seen smoke, some kind of fire, perhaps some more kind of destruction inside, and you're not seeing that in this video. You know, I've talked to someone who basically is getting briefed from some folks on the scene, and they basically say that it did occur on the perimeter. Pamela Brown has spoken to someone who gave her the same sort of information. And, you know, when you do, it's exactly like you said, Anderson, when you look at that video, it doesn't look like any of this happened inside.
Right. Shimon Prokupez, I appreciate you working your sources. Pamela Brown as well. Phil Black is with us, as well as Eric Hall. Phil, just from, you know, as you work both at the CIA and the FBI, you know, for news organizations, often the early reports that we get, eyewitness reports, turn out to be inaccurate because 3 or 4 people say they heard multiple blasts, but what they really heard is the same blast, or one, you know, they saw one gunman, but they saw them in different locations, and so people make it more than it is. What do you, from investigators, what is the, you know, the British intelligence, British investigators doing right now? I'm sorry, actually, Phil Black, let's go to you. Are you hearing any public statements from British police?
No further update from their initial reports, which was simply a significant incident, reports of an explosion, asking people to stay away. Emergency services and first responders are trying to get in there still to try and deal with that very human need that has followed this. So what you're talking about there is absolutely true, Anderson. We don't have a sense precisely of what caused this. Consistently now, I think we are hearing from witnesses that there was one loud blast. Initially, there were reports of more, but increasingly the consistent line coming through from witnesses on the ground is that there was one loud noise of some kind just outside the main arena itself. You've made the point that from the video that we can see within the arena, there is no obvious sign of some sort of explosion or detonation there, no smoke, no point of blast. But what you can see from that video clearly is the terror, as people try to get out of there in one large, huge crash.
Phil, let me just interrupt you. Manchester police have just confirmed 19 deaths have been confirmed, 19 fatalities, around 55 people have been injured. Again, you saw that long line of ambulances heading toward the arena. So this is the first actual confirmation of fatalities, 19 confirmed dead, 55 people injured so far. Steve Hall, you worked with and I'm just being told the explosion was at 10:35 p.m., 10:35 p.m. local time. It is now 1:13 a.m. Local time. So this was some 10, 11, 12, 3 hours, almost, just about 3 hours ago. Steve Hall, from your work in intelligence over the years, in terms of the investigation, in these kind of early hours, with all these conflicting reports come in, how difficult is it with these large numbers of people in this arena to kind of sift through eyewitness accounts?
Yeah, Anderson, I mean, it's especially in the early going, it's extremely chaotic. The police and law enforcement obviously have the lead, not just in the early steps of the investigation to try to determine, was it a terrorist attack, could it have been something else, but also just to triage the situation to make sure that, people who are injured get taken care of, just basic crowd control, and also, as you mentioned earlier, trying to make sure that if there are key witnesses that those people remain or at least reachable in the future. But what's going on behind that in terms of the intelligence service pieces is that you've got all the different disciplines, the human intelligence, signals intelligence, going back over recent intelligence and saying, okay, was there any indication, did we miss something? And most importantly, is there any indication that this is only the first of perhaps a series of attacks? So some of the technical collection stuff becomes incredibly important. That gives you, in an attempt for the intelligence services are attempting to determine whether or not there are other indications that would give law enforcement and the government indications that there may be something else coming in the future. It takes time. The intelligence piece, you have to collect it and then analyze it. But in the coming hours, you can be sure that the Brits will be working very hard. They'll also be reaching out, I think, to the cooperative intelligence relationships that they have with other Western intelligence services, saying, "Had you guys heard anything? What can you guys bring to the table that will help us determine whether there could be additional attacks, not just getting to the bottom of the attack that's already occurred?"
Yeah, I mean, Steve, you think back to the attacks in Paris that we saw. There were multiple explosions. There was an attempt to attack at a soccer match. That really the bombs there were detonated outside because they found it difficult to get inside. Security at an event, something like this, in Great Britain no less, is going to be tight. Bags are going to be searched, most likely their magnetometers as people are entering the venue.
Yeah, the security when you have any large event, and this was, by all accounts, a good-sized event, but especially for even larger things, the cooperation between the intel guys and the law enforcement folks is critical because you have concentric circles of security, you have rings of security, starting at the outside with just, a police presence and then getting more and more aggressive as you get closer to the venue. So the initial reporting sounds consistent that, if it was a terrorist attacker or whoever the attacker was, got probably through the initial stuff, got close enough, but then, when it became impossible to go much further, perhaps decided, to detonate an explosive or something. That's all speculation, but that's consistent with some of the things that we've seen in the past when you have these concentric circles of security around a big event like this one.
And Steve, I mean, we are now nearly 3 hours after this event, this explosion took place. We're told now, according to Manchester Police, the explosion, or whatever it was, took place at 10:35 p.m. local time. Is now 1:17 a.m. How long does an early investigation like this how does it play out? What is the timeline on something like this? I mean, how many hours does it usually take before a greater picture is known, before CCTV camera images are looked at? Great Britain has an awful lot of cameras on the streets, a lot of eyes everywhere.
Yeah. No, London itself, as well as most other British cities and other locations in the UK have a very, very pervasive video coverage capability. So that's a good news, bad news story. The good news is that it's likely that something is on a camera someplace. The bad news, of course, is that you have to process that, and you have to do it in a timely fashion. And rest assured, these guys are crashing on this, trying to find out, where are their tips and where are their indications. You remember with the Zarnea brothers, it took, I can't remember how long, but a considerable amount of time before the video of that Boston bombing attack yielded information that was actionable. So they're going to try to push as hard as they get, but a lot of it just depends on how lucky they get, how much information they're able to get in these first hours. But it's definitely going to be a long night for both the law enforcement and intelligence folks over in the UK.
And Phil Black, I just want to, if for our viewers who are just joining us, you see it on the screen, Manchester Police now confirming 19 people have been killed, around 50 or so injured. Do we have a sense of anything about the extent of those injuries? And has everybody been treated? I mean, given that it's been 3 hours, I assume most of the people have been taken from the scene, most of the wounded and the injured. We saw those ambulances either heading to or leaving from the venue.
Yeah, it's very likely that those who need help are currently receiving it. You wouldn't think there'd be any more people waiting at this time. But I think the shocking thing are the figures that we're hearing now from the police itself. At least 19 people killed and 50 wounded. And as we've been talking about, this is an Ariana Grande concert. This is mostly young people, teenagers, possibly children with parents. Those are the sorts of people that were caught up in the middle of this and were terrified as they left the venue shortly afterwards. There's another key line in the police statement which has only just been released and which we're talking about now, and that is the police say this is currently being treated as a terrorist incident until police know otherwise. I guess you could say that's pretty standard in a sense, but what they're not doing is speculating, but they are assuming perhaps the worst case scenario here at the moment, and that is that this was an organised attack. And if that is the case, then as we've seen from previous incidents here in the UK, the initial concern is getting first responders there to help the wounded and getting them the help they need, but also trying to determine to what extent there could be a further threat there at the location or perhaps in other places as well. So the police will be in the process of locking that place down, searching it incredibly thoroughly to be absolutely sure that the threat to people there and to the emergency services and first responders who are working there, well, that has in fact passed and there is no further threat or the possibility of further loss of life there as well.
And Steve Hall, I mean, this does present real challenges for law enforcement, not just investigating what happened, but when you have an arena with 20,000 people and there's been some sort of explosion outside, local authorities on the scene in that moment are faced with the idea of, I assume, do they just try to get everybody out of the venue out of fear that there may be something more inside? Or is having 20,000 people exit a venue that make them potential targets if there was some other aspect of this incident waiting outside?
Yeah, I think in my experience working with law enforcement, mostly foreign law enforcement, not U.S. law enforcement in cases like this, they're gonna try to clear the area as soon as possible because there is always a concern of, you know, are there other explosive devices that have not yet been detonated? You'll recall that was a key question in the St. Petersburg metro bombings that happened recently in Russia. The Russians did indeed end up finding another device in another metro car. So I think the key thing for law enforcement at this point is to clear the area to make sure that there's no other that there are no other risks that could do further damage at that particular site. But it's extremely chaotic. They are going to want to try to be in contact with people to get key and critical information that'll help unravel this. So that's trying to keep track of people who they're at the same time trying to get out of the area is going to be a challenge as well. But there's so much data out there right now that they're trying to pull down, corroborate, and try to make sense of that. It's going to be at least a number of hours before either the intelligence or law enforcement folks have a better idea as to what really happened.
Joining us also Sam Ward right now, who lives nearby. I understand heard the blast. Sam's joining us on the phone. Sam, can you just explain what you heard and if you saw anything?
Yeah, so we heard an extremely loud bang. It was really sharp, really sudden, nothing like I've ever heard in the city centre before. Sorry, just as you was talking then, we've just had 7 ambulances exit the Manchester Central Fire Station, all with blue lights and sirens flashing, and really rush down to the arena. I'm not too sure what's just happened, but there was a large amount of ambulances just left the venue then. I'm currently looking at a roadblock. There's at least another 25 ambulances positioned on the pavement, just almost literally sat there waiting. There's 5 or 6 fire engines that I can see, all with the crews stood by just as if they're waiting to be given the nod again to just go. A very, very, very large police presence, all from tactical aid units through to armed response, just a general police. I don't know if you can hear the sirens, but something is kicking off again, whether it's a second. It seems to be coming in waves, all the convoys. None of the vehicles seem to be moving on their own. They all seem to be 5 or 6 deep at any one time. The firemen are actually running into the fire station now. I'm not too sure what's happening. It's just absolutely mental at the moment.
So, Sam, about how far away from this arena do you live, or are you?
I'm 200 meters. 200 meters from the arena, and I'm about 100 meters away from the city centre fire station, which is a very large city centre fire station. They've got two forecourts plus an overspill car park, which is all currently being occupied, from everything from Salvation Army vehicles all the way through to the ambulances and the rapid response vehicles as well.
And Sam, have most of the people who were in the arena, I mean, we were told some 20,000 people were there, are they gone from the area now?
Yeah, the area is still, it's very quiet. It's very quiet for the city centre. Initially, after the first wave of sirens and the initial evacuation, it was filled with cars. The roads were absolutely bedlam, people just going through red lights. It was very much families, there was kids, mums and dads. They were all doing everything they could to get out of the city centre, and it looks like the emergency services did a really good job of managing that traffic, because it was only sort of bedlam for about 5 minutes, and now the roads are extremely still. I'm not too sure if you can hear it, but we've got 2 helicopters above us, both hovering extremely low. You can almost feel the thud from the blades coming from them.
Sam, I appreciate you talking to us, and I appreciate your clear head in all this and describing what you were seeing right now. Sam Ward, thank you so much. Freelance photographer Joel Goodman is also on the phone joining us. Joel, I understand you arrived at the scene. Can you tell me when you got there, how soon after whatever this was, whatever kind of an explosion it was, and what you saw and heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got there quite early, to be honest. It's difficult to say, but when I arrived, there were quite a few sort of walking wounded, lots of ambulance and police running around backwards and forwards, treating people who were bandaged up and quite severe injuries, both on the ground and sort of walking. Very quickly, they've sort of pushed cordons back further and further, obviously try and keep the area clear and safe, and so they can work safely in there. But I could probably give you an exact time if you gave me a minute. Hang on a second.
We understand the blast itself took place at 10:35 p.m., so if you know what time.
Okay, thank you. That's more than I know. I got there at 11:20.
Okay. You said you saw a number of kind of walking wounded people with injuries. I obviously don't want to get into too much detail, but the nature of the injuries was there anything you could deduce from that? Whether they were people, there was a question of how much injuries were caused by the explosion or blast itself, how much may have been people being pushed, or the crush of people trying to leave.
The injuries I saw, I'm not an expert on that, and I couldn't say for certain, but it didn't look like the sort of injury you'd get just tripping over someone in a hurry. You're talking about people with bandages on their heads and their legs with blood. So yeah, I think it was more severe than that.
Do you have any sense, Sam, Joel, of where this blast actually occurred in? Because we're told it seems from the video we're seeing it's unlikely that it was actually inside the arena itself, given that we've seen video from in the arena and there's no sign of it, that it may have been on the outskirts of the arena. And we're looking at one of the photos you took of a gentleman being helped, it looks like, or several people being helped. Do you have an idea of where this blast may have occurred?
Well, those pictures were taken near the entrance of Victoria Station, which is a railway station adjacent to the arena, and they sort of link up internally. Once you get into the station, there's a box office area before you get into the arena. I don't know where these injuries occurred, but I imagine it would be between where I was stood and that box office area, just based on gut, on what I could see. But I don't know that for certain.
So can you just explain the geography of that? Because that's interesting, because there had been other reports that perhaps this occurred somewhere near a box office. You're saying that the subway station, the tube station, actually links up with the arena?
Well, it's a railway station, so it's an overground station called Victoria Station. And yes, it and the arena effectively adjoin. So you walk from one to the other via the same route. You're sort of part of it.
And when you talk about a box office, is that a box office for the train, or is that a box office for the arena itself?
No, that would be the box office for the arena. So the box office for the arena is accessible from, there's a train and a Metrolink station, again, overground tram, which link via a walkway. So the idea is you can come straight from the arena and get straight on a tram.
And Joel, I'm just getting word that the arena itself just tweeted out that this incident took place outside the venue in a public space. That's a tweet from the Manchester Arena. So just, if I could just get specific on that box office that you talked about, you said someone getting off a train could walk heading toward the box office, Without...
You'd walk sort of 2 minutes from the train or the tram, you'd go up a flight of stairs and across a very short walkway, and you'd be at the box office of the arena. So,
and there's no security...
One hub.
Is there security for before the box office, or is security, I assume, after the box office?
Yeah, I mean, it's domestic security, so it's sort of for everyday sort of stuff, like, you know, in case something goes wrong on an everyday level rather than specifically. I mean, like, there's lots of armed police in and around the streets right now, which for Manchester is extremely unusual to see. There wouldn't have been routinely any armed police on the streets. There would be low-key, and there certainly wouldn't be anyone with a weapon at all in the arena officially.
In terms of being searched, in terms of when you would be searched before going to the arena, it would be after the box office, I assume.
Yeah, box office, and there's a queue from the arena space where everyone is searched. I mean, I was covering an event there 2 days ago, and everyone gets searched going in, everyone gets patted down.
Okay.
So you've got like a public space, which is, as I say, the bit which joins with the train station, and then you've got the arena space.
So that helps in trying to...
searched and patted down going in routinely.
Yeah, we appreciate it. It helps to try to piece together what may have happened. Joel Goodman, thank you so much. I want to go back to our Shimon Prokupecz, who has got more reporting. Shimon, what are you learning?
That's right, Anderson. We're just getting word into our newsroom in Washington, D.C., that the possible cause into this explosion was a suicide bomber. 3 officials who've been briefed on this investigation, 2 U.S. officials and a Western official to Pamela Brown, all have said that right now investigators on the scene believe that a suicide bomber detonated a bomb as people were leaving the venue, which then caused all of these injuries and the deaths. This is, again, it's very preliminary because investigators are still trying to piece together what happened. You know, though it is a couple of hours into this explosion, there still seems not to be 100% certainty as to what caused this. But they do believe right now that this was some kind of a terrorist act and that potentially a suicide bomber set off a bomb.
And as far as what you're hearing, there was just one person, one possible suicide bomber.
That's right, and I spoke to actually a U.S. official on that, Anderson, who basically said, you know, if this is a suicide bomber, this changes everything, because the question now becomes how did this person get to the venue? Is there a larger network behind this? And so now that process is underway to try and figure out who this person was, who's he working with, are there others out there who may be plotting other similar explosions?
Shimon, I appreciate that. Continue to work your sources. We'll check in with you, with Pamela Brown as well. Joining us now is CNN terrorism analyst Paul Cruikshank. Paul, the notion that Shimon Prokupecz is reporting based on 3 sources that he and Pamela Brown have talked to, that this would have been a suicide bomber, that certainly does change the situation just in terms of the investigation. It's very unlikely that a suicide bomber would actually manufacture the device or the vest that they themselves were using. Usually it's somebody else who is too valuable for whatever this group is to actually detonate it themselves.
Well, Anderson, we don't know that yet. We have seen some instances where there have been individuals who've taken action, managed to build their own devices. In the past, we saw that in New York City, the Chelsea devices back in September of last year. But certainly the concern at this hour will be that there is a Islamist terrorist cell behind this. They'll be worried about follow-on attacks. It's not lost right now on British authorities that with the Paris attacks back in November 2015, there was also an attack on a concert hall, the Bataclan, that night, and that was part of a multi-wave coordinated attack on the French capital. So that's why you're seeing a lot of armed presence right now on the streets of Manchester, concerned that there could be follow-on attacks from the rest of this cell, if indeed there is a cell involved in this. A very worrying night for British authorities. I've been told in recent weeks by British officials that the threat level here is blinking red when it comes to Islamist terrorism, higher than at any point in British history. That's because of the fact that so many British nationals, residents of this country, have gone off and fought in Syria and Iraq, joining groups like ISIS. Almost 900 have made the trip. A good number have returned to the UK. They're seeing increased return rates coming back really right throughout Europe, Anderson. But there's also a big homegrown radicalization problem which is fueling this. Radicals who are staying behind and are being encouraged by groups like ISIS to take action and being given instructions over the internet, over these secure encrypted channels in how to do that.
Paul, correct me, you know this better than I do, certainly. If memory serves me correct, Manchester, we have seen arrests in Manchester in recent years, have we not?
That's right. We've seen quite a few arrests in Manchester in the years since 9/11. There has been a sort of local Islamist scene there, the problem of extremism in Manchester and the surrounding areas. Back in 2009, there was a major al-Qaeda plot targeting a shopping centre in the city, which was really thwarted at the last minute by British authorities at Easter 2009. And we've seen other arrests in the city over the last few years. We've seen people move from that area to Syria and Iraq. People move from Syria and Iraq back to those parts of the UK. So that's kind of the mix that they're faced with right now. A very elevated terrorist threat, and of course there's a general election coming up here in just a couple of weeks. ISIS has not yet got a big attack through in the UK. They've got big attacks through in other countries. There was, of course, that attack which was inspired, it seems, by ISIS back in March. The driver, Khalid Massoud, in Westminster, who killed 4 people, knocked over pedestrians, stabbed a policeman. But there has not been a mass casualty attack that's got through by a group like ISIS. Really, since the London bombings all the way back in 2005. But at this hour, no claim of responsibility yet from any terrorist group. So we're going to have to wait and see. But they're scrambling right now in Manchester. All over the UK, this country tonight is on maximum alert. We're going to have to see if that threat level goes up. We'll expect there to be a Cobra meeting of the Prime Minister at Downing Street, I think, in the hours ahead. They're very, very concerned.
Paul, I've just learned Manchester police are reporting that there will be a controlled explosion of some sort of what they deem a suspicious item about a block away from the arena in an open space that is called Cathedral Gardens. Again, this is going to be a controlled detonation of a suspicious device, Paul, which is pretty standard procedure. This is about a block away. Oftentimes, if this is, in fact, a suicide attack, we have seen it's become almost commonplace in these kinds of things to have multiple attacks or even diversionary attacks. Even in the Bataclan, as I recall, there were, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, if memory serves me, two people who attempted to detonate devices and did detonate devices outside a soccer stadium.
That's right. I mean, in Paris back in November 2015, there were essentially 3 waves of attacks. One was at the Bataclan concert hall. 3 kamikaze suicide bombers armed with Kalashnikovs that killed some security guards outside, stormed the concert and killed almost 90 people in a space of just about 10 or 20 minutes before the police response came. At the same time, that night there were attacks on cafes by a group led by Abdelhamid Abaoud, the ringleader in that plot. And so this was a sort of coordinated strike back in Paris in November of 2015, Anderson. We haven't seen any reports of that yet so far in the UK, but there's concern that there may be more coming down the pipeline when it comes to this threat.
And Paul, you were saying that, I mean, how does this change now that there is reports that this may have been a suicide bomber, just in terms of the level of attention the intelligence services pays to this? How does that ratchet this up?
Well, obviously, a suicide bomber, I mean, that would be the hallmarks of an Islamist terrorist plot, attack. So they'll be looking in that direction tonight if they indeed do confirm that there was a suicide bomber involved. There are also eyewitnesses interviewed just in the last few minutes on BBC radio talking about what they described as nuts lying all over the floor, and that would be consistent with a kind of shrapnel type of device which we've seen groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS encourage their recruits to build. So that's certainly where this is pointing tonight. We cannot conclude that for sure at this stage. We're going to have to wait for police to tell us much more in the hours ahead. But given the fact that they're looking into this real possibility, and there is, it would appear, some evidence that this was a suicide bombing, that certainly takes you down the Islamist terrorist direction. It must also be noted that in recent months in Europe there have been a number of false flag plots where right-wing extremists have tried to frame Islamists for terrorism. We've seen that in Germany in recent weeks, but a suicide bomber really does take you down the direction of Islamist terrorism.
It also, if it was an individual or individuals, given the amount of surveillance cameras that I imagine are around this arena, certainly Great Britain has an extensive video surveillance network, CCTV network, the fact that if it was an individual, they tried to, it seemed, time it for when people would have been leaving this venue at around 10:35 p.m., there would probably be, relatively easy to find, given that there's also a train station attached to this, CCTV footage of somebody, this person, waiting around or approaching. It won't be long before investigators are able to figure out, Paul, kind of the direction this person came from and get an image of this person, I would think.
Oh, that's right. They'll already be looking through all those tapes, and they'll presumably be able to retrace where this person came from, how they traveled, if they were on public transport. Nearly every train and bus and metro in this country has some kind of CCTV capability. So they'll be able to presumably very quickly identify who this individual is, who they may be connected to. There'll also be a lot of forensics at the scene in terms of DNA, of fingerprint analysis to see if this is somebody on their radar screen. And we've seen in so many plots really on both sides of the Atlantic that the individuals who have perpetrated these attacks have already at some point been on the radar screen of security officials, and it's very difficult for the intelligence services to monitor everybody all the time. They just have the resources to monitor a fraction of the people that they consider a threat. We saw with the Westminster attacker just a few weeks ago here in the UK, Khalid Massoud, that he at a certain point several years previously had been on the radar screen of MI5, the British security services. So they'll be putting all that together, trying to figure out what, if any, network was behind this, and they'll be racing to make arrests if necessary to prevent follow-on attacks.
We should also point out we have just gotten word that there's going to be a Manchester Police press conference in the next several minutes. We're obviously going to bring that to you live when it happens for the latest of information. But right now, Manchester Police have confirmed 19 people have been killed. At least around 50 or so people have been injured. Police say that they're going to have a controlled detonation of what they determined to be a suspicious device very close to this arena. And they are looking at this based on the reporting of Shimon Prokupez and our Pamela Brown, based on 3 different sources, 2 U.S., 1 Western, with knowledge of the incident, that they are looking at this as a possible suicide bomber. A lot of questions obviously still to be heard, and hopefully in that press conference we'll get a lot more information. Phil Mudd is joining us. Phil, you worked at CIA and also obviously FBI. Just in terms of when you see this, what goes through your mind? What's happening on the ground?
First nightmares of living through this for 10 years post 9/11, remembering as a practitioner. But looking forward, what happens here, you see this in 2 waves. The first is the immediate event. What do they find at the scene? What are people saying? The eyewitnesses will not be reliable. But questions like the forensic analysis.
Not reliable because so many people see things from a different vantage point. It's it's just too confusing?
It's not confusing. People will say it was a yellow shirt, it was a blue car. They're inevitably wrong, and then they will confirm that over time because their mind starts to say, I'm sure I saw a yellow car, I'm sure I saw a blue shirt. Not true. What I want to see is the video. I want to see what happened with the device. For example, not only what kind of a device it was, but does it bear a resemblance from devices you've seen elsewhere that suggest somebody trained them who has trained other operatives?
Devices have a certain signature.
They do, and the people who train you to do this kind of thing are not going to train you on 10 different kinds of devices. So that could quickly tell you whether this person came from, for example, a Syrian training center. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying the people who conduct that kind of training are going to have a standard type of device that they train you on.
The possibility of a suspicious package could be an abundance of caution. It also would not be out of the realm of possibility that somebody would want to plant multiple devices.
Yeah, that's going to tell me a lot if it turns out to be a device that's actually active. What that will tell me is, did someone bring in 2 devices? I doubt it. That's immediately bringing to my mind the suggestion that this wasn't one person, it was 2, or going to maybe someone who wasn't just a lone wolf. Do we have a conspiracy here?
Although it could also just be someone who, in panic, dropped it back.
Could have been. What you see in these situations when you get a perimeter like this is panic. That person is high-strung, emotional, high alert. If they were, for example, approached by a security official, they're immediately going to be saying, I better detonate now because if I don't, my whole opportunity is lost. That's why security perimeters are so important. It might have been worse if it turns out that this was a device with a suicide attacker, if they hadn't obviously been intercepted at the perimeter. But somebody with that kind of alert mental state, that kind of emotional disturbance, as soon as they get confronted, more than likely is going to say, I better go now.
On the phone joining us is Paula Robinson, who I'm told was nearby and pitched in to help. Paula, if you could just tell what you saw, what you heard.
Hello. We was on Victoria train station waiting for our train home, and we heard an explosion. We heard and felt a loud, just one explosion. As we evacuated, we're about 10 yards from the arena. When we got outside, everyone was running from the arena. As we passed, there were children that were supposed to meet the parents outside there. We just got hold of them and said, come on, we need to get away. So I took them to the Holiday Inn, which was a safe distance away. Spoke to the parents on the way to safety, and they were picked up.
Paula, let me ask you, had you attended the concert?
No, we hadn't. We was out for our anniversary, but we were at the station, which is right at the side of the arena.
You said you heard the explosion. Do you have any sense of how close it may have been to you, how loud it was?
Well, we could feel the explosion as well as hear it. It was just like, it was muffled, but it was just like a huge boom.
Wait, when you said you could feel... Sorry, when you said you could feel it, are you talking about kind of an air blast or shaking of the ground?
Just like a shaking of the ground, possibly.
Okay. And
you could just feel it. It was very, very loud.
Our understanding is that the explosion took place around 10:35 p.m., according to Manchester Police. Were there many people in the area where you were? Had many people already exited the venue?
Well, we were just at the side. People were... But as we got out, literally outside is the arena, where hundreds and hundreds of people were just coming down. There's sort of like 2 lots of steps. They were coming down the steps onto the main walkway to leave, but they were just all evacuating quickly by the time we got outside. So everyone left. As soon as they heard it, everyone seemed to be going.
And were police already at the scene when you got there?
No, not at the time, but very, very soon afterwards there was ambulance, police. I don't think people really knew what was going on. The sellers outside were still selling T-shirts. We were having to get past them and stuff like that. People didn't see them, and then all of a sudden there was panic and everyone just ran everywhere.
Well, Paula, it's lovely that you reacted the way you did to try to help those kids and get them to a safe place and able to contact their parents. Thank you so much. I'm glad you and the people you're with are okay on your anniversary. Jamie Waller was at the concert, joins us now by phone as well. If you could, Jamie, just explain what you heard and saw.
She'd just finished singing, and she walked off the stage, and we all went down to go out, and there was just this huge explosion, this huge bang, and everyone just like looked at each other, and everyone just ran. We just needed to get out because we didn't know what was happening. It was just a mad panic.
So as soon as you heard this explosion, you knew this was not part of the concert itself?
Yeah, we knew something was wrong.
And so had the concert had ended, Ariana Grande had stopped singing, she was off the stage?
Yeah, she just finished doing Dangerous Woman, and then she left. And she ran off the stage, and then we all obviously the lights came on, everything was finished, and then everyone started to leave, and then that's when the bang happened.
And what happened after the bang? You said people started to rush?
Yeah, we just all ran. We all just wanted to get out because it was just a mad panic. We didn't know what was happening. The first thought was we need to get out of here just in case anything happens again.
Was there any announcement made at any point as you were trying to get out?
No, nothing. We were all we didn't know what was happening at all.
How difficult was it to actually get out? I mean, it looks obviously very chaotic. Obviously, a lot of people are very frightened. There's kids there. How difficult was it to get out?
Me and my sister were out in seconds. Like, everyone was on the same page. Everyone just wanted to leave. So everyone was just running in the same direction.
And as you left, what did you do?
I just kept going. And the police were like, just carry on moving. So we just followed the crowd, and we found a place, so we stood, and then all the police started rushing all the ambulances, and there was people on the floor, and all the paramedics came around, and we were just waiting then until we knew a little bit more information.
And I assume how close were you to the train station?
I think we were above it. I'm not completely sure because it's just a state of shock, but we were literally probably meters away from it.
Well, Jamie, I'm glad you were able to get out quickly, and thank you very much for talking to us tonight. A very difficult night for so many of those who were there. Late word on that controlled explosion that we told you about a few minutes ago. According to police, the item in question, which they detonated, was abandoned clothing, nothing dangerous. And we're continuing to be here with Phil Mudd. Phil, obviously that's a good thing in that there's not, it seems like, more than this one particular incident or more than one attempt.
Sure, but anytime you're going down this road, and you've heard this referred to as a potential terrorism investigation, that's not a suggestion, that practitioners believe that's what happened. It's just you don't have time to waste in the event that there's a broader network. You talked about just one potential device here. You still have a lot of questions. Who trained them? Who radicalized them? Where'd the money come from? You can have a conspiracy even if you have a one-off attack, especially with a device that looks this significant. I'm looking at this saying, are we sure if this is a single suicide bomber? He had the capability to build a design like this with this level of lethality by himself. You've got to go to conspiracy even if you have no evidence to suggest that yet.
How likely is it that somebody built their own device, or was that usually the device built by somebody else?
In this case, I'm going to look at this saying, if you have a one-off, that to me starts to decrease the likelihood of a conspiracy that involves somebody overseas training. The one piece here that I'm looking at is the size and potential sophistication of the device, but there's a clear signal you can look at in these investigations. As soon as you get more than one person, the likelihood you have outside assistance, that they sat around and sought a bomb maker, for example, overseas, could help them increase. When you have a one-off individual, the likelihood he acted alone, maybe built the device alone, increases. People typically like that, in my experience, sometimes also have psychological problems. They just decide they got to do something, and they'll go do it.
Paul Cruikshank, I should just remind our viewers, we are waiting for a press conference from Manchester Police. We believe it's going to take place any minute. At the latest, we're told maybe at the top of the hour, about 7.5 minutes from now. It is 1:52 a.m. in Manchester. The investigation obviously well underway. The area has largely been cleared, Paul Cruikshank, that we understand from the concert goers who were there. A device was just detonated. We had an eyewitness, Sam Ward, just a few moments ago, who was looking out on the street, said there were helicopters flying low. He still saw ambulances heading toward the arena from the local fire station, which is right next to the arena. But Paul, there's a lot going on not only in Manchester but also in London and really probably throughout Europe at this hour as police and intelligence are trying to look for any possible leads on this.
That's right, Anderson. The entire apparatus that the British have put together to counter terrorism since 9/11 is going into full gear tonight, into full gear to understand where this threat came from and whether there are more threats out there. Given the fact that we're hearing the possibility that this was a suicide bombing, the concern will be that this was an act of Islamist terrorism. The concern will be a group like Al-Qaeda or ISIS could be behind it, groups with networks of operatives who have cell structures which they can potentially put into operation for these kind of attacks. But it shouldn't be ruled out that this could be a single individual, somebody who's managed to put a device together just on their own. We've seen ISIS over these encrypted apps online reach out to sympathizers and operatives in the West, providing very detailed bomb-making instructions. They'll be doing a lot of forensics right now at the scene, try to see what type of explosive was used. Was it something like TATP, which has emerged as a signature for ISIS in its recent attacks in Europe, notably in Paris, in Brussels, or was it some other type of explosive that was used? Given the force of the blast, it may well be that this was a high explosive that was used, a devastating high explosive in a confined space. They'll be running all of the CCTV to try and trace back where this attacker came from, which address, how they were acting in the minutes before the attack. Were they given something by anybody that's been caught by the huge number of CCTV cameras all across Manchester? This investigation is really going to be going at full speed, and the key concern is to prevent future attacks, more attacks from any kind of cell that's still out there, Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, when you look, and again, we are waiting a press conference any minute now, we're going to bring that to you. Paul, when you look at the volume of attacks that we have seen in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere, do you have a sense of how many of suicide bombings, how many were carried out by just an individual who manufactured their own device and went ahead and did this, whether they were encouraged online or not, and how many, or is the vast majority of this somebody who is connected to some sort of a network, whether it's a sophisticated network or just a couple of individuals?
We've seen plots, many plots with just individuals who plan to be suicide bombers. We've also seen plots from networks, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, where that's the case. I don't think that gets us anywhere closer to knowing whether this was a single individual who was responsible for this or a wider cell. I think those answers are going to come in the hours ahead. The first we'll know about it is if there are major raids across Manchester. And what we hear from the results of those. I think given the fact they'll be going through all the CCTV, trying to figure out where this person was living, that there are likely to be raids in the hours ahead in different locations, perhaps in the UK. We often see that after these kinds of incidents. But this appears to have been a major mass casualty terrorist attack, and this country has not suffered one of those since the London bombings all the way back in 2005. And that's really a testament to the professionalism of British security services, who are regarded by many of their peers around the world as best in class. They put a lot of resources, a lot of technology behind preventing what we saw play out just a few hours ago in Manchester. But given the scale of the threat, they cannot stop all kind of attacks getting through. We saw a terrorist attack getting through just a few weeks ago on a bridge in Westminster, and the reality is that there will be more attacks that will get through in the months and years ahead, especially as ISIS loses ground in Syria and Iraq, and more of these foreign fighters start gravitating back to Europe. People who are trained killers coming back with an axe to grind against countries like Britain who have been launching airstrikes in Syria and Iraq.
And Phil Mudd, I mean, in terms of an investigation like this, who would be taking the lead on it? I mean, is this Manchester Police at this point, or is this
British Internal Security Service? Yeah. You should think of this in two parallel paths. The police and the Manchester Police are terrific. There's a lot of extremist activity in Manchester. They're going to have informant networks where as soon as they get a photo off CCTV, they can go into those networks. But the British Security Service has a broader responsibility. You got to look through masses of data to determine whether other people around the UK are communicating or were involved in this. So you have to have the immediate investigation of what happened in Manchester, which will be supported by security services outside the Manchester Police, and then the expanding investigation. Broader UK cell going back to was somebody overseas involved in supporting this or even just radicalizing this individual.
And we are just minutes away, we believe, from this press conference from Manchester Police. Paul, you know, you and I have talked a lot about, in the wake of the Bataclan attacks, the series of attacks around there in Paris, about the difficulties that French intelligence faces, certainly that Belgian intelligence faces, the lack of coordination we have seen. Where do the British stand in relation to that?
Well, there's excellent coordination between MI5, the domestic security service, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the various British police forces, especially the Metropolitan Police Force here in London, which is really the lead force in the UK when it comes to the terrorism threat. They work in each other's buildings every day. There's a lot of routine sharing of intelligence. There's a hurdle, however, when it comes to sharing across Europe, when it comes to sharing between the different intelligence services in the European Union, the information coming, say, from the French to the British or vice versa, or from the Germans to the French. I've heard a lot of frustrations from a lot of officials right across Europe that information is just not coming in sufficient quantity and sufficiently quickly, given the gravity of the threat facing Europe over the last few years, and not enough yet has been done to improve that intelligence sharing, Anderson. The one thing the United Kingdom has got going for it compared to the continental Europe right now is it's much more difficult for these Islamist extremists to purchase on the black market or in any other way AK-47s, Kalashnikovs in the UK. Much harder to get guns on the streets of Manchester, on the streets of London, than on the streets of Amsterdam, on the streets of Brussels, on the streets of Paris. And of course, in Paris on that night, back in November of 2015, Anderson, that was a coordinated gun and bomb attack on a stadium, on the Bataclan concert hall, and on those cafes. We have only in Manchester at this time seen what appears to have been a single suicide bomber carry out an attack.
Yeah, if you're just joining us, we are bringing the latest developments from the United Kingdom, what police are treating as a suspected terrorist bombing there, a possible suicide detonation, a deadly explosion just outside an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, England. It happened just before 10:35 p.m. local time. An eyewitness tells CNN the blast happened outside the Manchester arena shortly after the concert ended. Police say 19 people have been killed, approximately 50 people have been hurt. And again, authorities are treating it as a possible terrorist attack until they learn otherwise. We are expecting to hear from them very shortly. We've been giving a heads up. It's supposed to be right at the top of the hour. It is now just 2 minutes past that. I want to go first to CNN's Phil Black, who has been monitoring this now for several hours from London. Phil, what's the latest you're hearing?
Well, Anderson, we're getting a much clearer picture of what happened here, and I think that the interesting information that's come through more recently is the confirmation from the venue itself, the Manchester Arena. It's confirmed that the blast did in fact take place outside of the venue, which confirms an observation that I know we've made through the evening. Looking at the video from within inside the arena, it didn't show any obvious point of detonation. There was no smoke. It didn't look like a bomb had gone off in that area. Now the venue itself is confirming that yes, the blast, or the incident as it describes it, took place just outside the venue, just outside the concert just after the concert had finished, just as people were leaving the venue. That's what witnesses have told us as well. One blast, and according to the police, as you touched on there, 19 confirmed dead as a result of this, as many as 50 or more injured. And we know that many of these were young people, teenagers, children with parents and so forth, who'd spent the night enjoying Ariana's concert just inside, Anderson.
of events. Phil Black, we continue to monitor this, waiting that press conference. Andy James is on the phone. He was there with his 9-year-old brother. Andy, thanks so much for being with us. You were at the concert itself?
Yeah, so we got to the concert at about 7 p.m. And then had a good time, everything like that. It was really good. It was his first concert that he'd ever been to. And then I think it was about 10:40, the explosion happened, and we was walking up the stairs just about to leave in the exact same direction as where the actual explosion happened.
So you heard the explosion very clearly?
Oh, yeah. It mustn't have been, 40 feet away from where we were. And we heard the explosion happen. The boom rattled in my chest, and, you could feel it, in the ground, and it was just horrific. So we just
Andy,
Andy, yeah?
Can you tell me what direction, you said you were that close to the explosion, you actually felt it in your chest. What direction were you walking in, and what direction do you think the explosion took place in? Because there's been some who have said it may have taken place close to a box office on away from the train station.
Yeah, so it was in we've heard from quite a few people that it was in the foyer of where, near the box office of where it was actually happening, and we actually came through the entrance of where, that bomb actually, or the explosion, sorry, whatever it was, we came through where that actually happened when we actually came into the concert. And it happened, it was the top left hand of the side of the arena. And, at the top of the stairs just there.
So, Andy, let me ask you, you said you came through that way. What sort of security, did you pick up a ticket at the box office? And then I assume you were checked for security at some point. What sort of security did you go through after that?
So, when I had the tickets already printed off, and we was coming through the main entrance of the arena. And, the security was fine. People, they were checking bags and everything like that. So it was all, it all looked, seemingly normal as what you would expect.
And as you left, what did you see?
So we left to go in the opposite direction of where the explosion happened. We was going up there. There was a stampede of people. I was trying to help people up as I was leaving. And we was just going in the total opposite direction of where it was happening. We had to go up the stairwell and back through where the toilets were. And as we got outside, we was just sort of looking around to sort of see where we were and get our bearings. And then there was another sort of boom. I don't know whether the second one was actual explosion or there were balloons in the concert, and they were obviously constantly going on, being popped, and I just told my little brother that this is what it was. It wasn't an explosion; it was the balloons. But he's 9 years old. He knows what goes on in the world, and it's such a shame, really.
How is your little brother doing? I mean, I can't imagine this is his first concert. It's scary for any 9-year-old to be in a crowd of 20,000 people who are panicked. How is he?
Yeah. Well, he's home in bed asleep now, thank God. I was, ushering him out of the arena. I had my hand on his chest, and his heart was beating so fast, and I thought, I'm responsible for him, because we was walking up to the other exit, and all that was going through your head was, there are going to be people with guns there, there's going to be another explosion. Your mind just switches into a different mode, and I just really, really felt sorry for him, thinking, this is his first concert, and this has happened now. And I had my friends messaging me and texting me, asking me if I was okay, and I didn't even know what was happening before, anyone else knew. But he's okay.
How difficult was it for you to get out and to get home? I mean, you had 20,000 people leaving this arena all at once, police moving in.
So when we was leaving, everyone was just, going into one direction. So it was just I was just keeping hold of him to make sure he was, right by me. And as soon as we got outside, I just bolted in the other direction and just, because I know the city centre, I work in the city centre, so I know it, like the back of my hand. And I just went down by a couple more shops, and because we were going to get the tram home, but the tram goes through the arena of where it was happening, so, there was just no chance of that. So I called our dad, and he came and picked us up.
Well, Andy, I'm so glad you and your brother are okay, and I'm glad you're such a good big brother that he had you there by his side. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.
A short time ago, authorities carried out a controlled explosion. They detonated a suspicious item in an open area around Cathedral Gardens, which is not far from the arena. We understand from law enforcement it turned out to be old clothing, nothing dangerous. Again, we hope to hear from police shortly. We were told that there's supposed to be a press conference any moment. We'll obviously bring that to you as it happens. With us this hour, monitoring developments, and developments are moving quickly. I mean, we began about an hour and 10 minutes ago not really having a clear understanding of what, if anything, had happened, whether it was just some sort of, something went wrong in the concert, some sort of device, and that people panicked. Now, according to the reporting of Pamela Brown and Shimon Prokupecz from CNN, from 3 different sources, 2 U.S. sources, 1 Western, who have been briefed on the matter, that they believe now they're looking at the possibility of a suicide bomber. A number of the eyewitness reports, and again, you have to be cautious about any kind of eyewitness reports, but a number of eyewitnesses have talked about the explosion seeming to come from somewhere around a box office area, which is also accessed to an above-ground train station, I believe it was Victoria Station, that's connected to this arena. The arena itself has tweeted out that the explosion took place outside the arena. They obviously wanted to point out that their security procedures were in place. You just heard from Andy James, a concert goer who brought his brother, his 9-year-old brother, to his first concert. That they went through security. Bags were checked, as one would anticipate, not only at a big concert like this in the U.S., but certainly in Great Britain, which has seen a history of terrorism. I want to check in with CNN's Shimon Prokupecz, who has been working his sources, bringing us up to date. Shimon, if you could just, anything new you've learned, and if you could just bring us up to date on what all you're reporting so far.
That's right, Anderson. So what we've learned through the last hour or so is that U.S. officials who have been briefed on the investigation, it's 2 U.S. officials, both to Pamela Brown, Evan Perez, and I, saying that the likely cause of this explosion was a suicide bomber. Officials believe that the person who was wearing this, whatever it may be, we don't know if it's a suicide vest or some other device that was used, did this as people were leaving the concert and caused some of the injuries. People were running, and it's believed that some of them who were running were injured. It appears now that some of the people may have been injured by the blast. The U.S. officials who have been briefed on this say they don't believe right now that anyone else was involved. That it was likely just one bomber, but they're obviously still continuing their investigation. They're still trying to figure out if this person was attached to anyone. Was this a cell? Who may have helped make the components of this bomb? Who may have helped bring this person to the scene? They believe it is a male who was the bomber. So still a lot to work through. And really right now, U.S. officials who are being briefed all are just telling us that it's all very preliminary, even though this happened, like over 3 hours ago. But this is still preliminary. They're still trying to gather information. Folks at the State Department and other intelligence agencies throughout the U.S. are being briefed, are being updated continuously. We don't know anything about the victims, if there are any U.S. Victims. So we're just sort of still working through it, still trying to keep things updated and trying to find out more information right now.
Yeah, we're obviously also trying to find out information about the status of the 50 or so people who have been injured, wounded. Certainly our thoughts and our prayers are with them and their families. And obviously, when it's appropriate and we get the information, we'll update you to give you a sense of what sort of injuries they have received and how most of them are doing. I'm joined by CNN's Paul Cruikshank and Phil Mudd. Phil, we talked about what law enforcement is doing just in terms of intelligence, the intelligence community. At this point, what are they focused on now?
Well, the first piece we don't have, which is whether they've got a piece of identification, not just a name, but you're looking around to see if there's a backpack. Did somebody leave their ID card in there? Do you have a cell phone, which will give you a number? We found that in the Chelsea bombing here in the United States. A cell phone didn't detonate. Brilliant piece of intelligence. But there's a lot you can do without that. With this density of activity in a place like Manchester, police and intelligence guys are looking at social media. They've already got people in my world what's called covered, people covered on email, people covered on phones, and they should have a pretty good informant network. So you're going out there looking at...
Because there's a history of extremism.
A lot of extremist activity in Manchester. So you got to go out and look at the wires, what we call the wires, social media, but also email, phone, to see if people are saying, Jimmy's gone, John's gone, did you see what's on TV? Somebody was talking about that last night. Even if you don't know there was a conspiracy, the concern you have is not only was there a support network, but was somebody else involved in the operational network who was watching this saying, the noose is going to tighten around me. I've got to go with my own operation now because otherwise the cops are going to get me tomorrow. That's why you're rushing out.
You also have, I mean, U.S. law enforcement, U.S. intelligence agencies, not just on the alert to understand what happened here, but also to see if there's any blowback for it in the United States. I mean, even NYPD famously, you know, they keep very close track of any terrorist incident around the world. They often try to have officers go over and learn from local law enforcement to understand, are there some new methods that jihadis or extremists are using? Is there a new way they're communicating? Is there a new way that they're trying to come up to cause mayhem?
There's a lot they'll be doing right now. The first is, as soon as they get a phone number, the question is, did that person ever call the United States? You're going to go out at least 2 hops. That is, not only did they call somebody who called in the United States himself. There's a huge volume of data you're looking through. Secondarily, you're looking at broader intelligence subjects. Are people elsewhere the U.S. is interested in Europe or potentially in a place like Syria or Iraq talking about this? For example, I'd be curious to know, are ISIS guys saying, are you looking at CNN? We never heard of this. Interesting clue. Even the negatives in this case are a clue. So you're blowing out from the location that the event took place, getting the information there, to the question about immediately, tactically, whether there's a support network, and then going back saying, is there a bigger group of people who are behind this cell and might be behind a cell in a place like New York or Chicago?
Paul Cruikshank, how active is a group like ISIS still in terms of their use of the internet, in terms of Twitter, to try to encourage people around the world to attack in place? You know, in the Garland terror attack in Garland, Texas, which was the first attack on U.S. soil claimed by ISIS, you had ISIS recruiters, one in Raqqa, one in Somalia, who were encouraging the attackers and in frequent contact with the attackers. Is that network still, and a number of them have been targeted and killed in drone strikes, is that network still very much in play?
Well, there's no doubt it's been degraded to some degree, but yes, it's still in play, and it's still active in and around Raqqa in Syria, the ISIS headquarters town, which is the headquarters as well of their external operations efforts. They are in touch with a variety of extremists in the West, in Europe, in the United States, to try to get them to carry out terrorist attacks in ISIS's name. And we've seen online direction over these encrypted apps in half of all the terrorist plots that we've seen in Europe since 2014. So a very big part of this terror threat coming from ISIS using encryption online to communicate with sympathizers back in the West. And it's very, very difficult to intercept any of that, if not impossible, in real time, Anderson, if you don't know who your target is, you don't have a suspect. And so European security agencies have been flying blind. US security agencies have been flying blind despite the huge amount of money spent on GCHQ here in the UK, spent on the NSA in the United States. In the case of the Brussels attack, they were actually able to record audio tapes and then, it appears, send those audio tapes, audio briefings over the internet using these encrypted apps to ISIS handlers in Syria and Iraq, giving them detailed feedback about their planning, even able to get precise bomb-making guidance from ISIS handlers in Syria. There's an umbilical cord right now through these encrypted apps when it comes to these terrorism attacks and plots in the West. And as you noted and have reported on, that was seen in Garland, Texas as well.
Yeah, Paul, we'll come back to you. We are about now 4+ hours from the detonation of this device. Law enforcement looking at this as a possible suicide attack. On the phone now is Joe McElhone, who was at the concert. Joe, thanks for talking with us. Just tell me what you saw and heard.
So about 2 or maybe 3 minutes after the concert finished and Ariana left the stage, people started to leave the seats to leave the arena. And there was just a really loud explosion, well, a really loud sound that turned out to be the explosion. Lots of people came running back in to get away from it, and then from then on it was just a mad rush to try and get out of the arena. So by the time we got out, about 5 minutes, getting down a staircase and got outside, the emergency services had begun to arrive, or were starting to arrive by then.
And you said some people actually, after the explosion, who had left, actually ran back into the arena.
They left the seating area to get to sort of the outer foyers, and they ran back into the seating area. From everything we have heard from a number of different eyewitnesses, it seems like, and again, you know, this may not be accurate, but what a number of eyewitnesses have said is that it seems like the explosion was somewhere near a box office in an area that's accessed by a above-ground train station. Is that an area you were anywhere near as you left, or did you exit a different way? I entered the concert that way, but I exited a different way. I was on the other side of the arena, so I didn't actually see the explosion.
And just in terms of security, when you entered, I talked to one person just a short time ago who said their bags were checked. Did you go through metal detectors?
I'm not sure about metal detectors, but my friend had a bag with her, and that was definitely checked.
And just in terms of when you left, you said law enforcement there. How difficult was it just to get out of the area?
I think, were a few of the first people to get out of the arena, possibly, so we crossed the road and just walked into the city centre to try and get as far away as possible.
And I understood you said that social media helped you get out.
Yeah, I was trying to get back to Liverpool, which is a city about 40 minutes away, and my people on social media were helping us to find transport to get back.
Wow. Well, Joe, I'm glad you're okay and got out safely and were able to get home. Thank you very much. We have reporting right now from Pamela Brown and Evan Perez, a Western law enforcement official telling CNN that a man at the scene in Manchester has been identified as the probable suicide bomber. A U.S. official said suicide bombing is now considered to be the likely reason for the blast. So that is a major step based from what we have heard now from Pamela Brown and Evan Perez. And I just want to repeat that. A Western law enforcement official telling CNN that a man at the scene in Manchester has been identified as the probable suicide bomber. A U.S. official said suicide bombing is now considered to be the likely reason for the blast. Steve Hall, you've been monitoring this as well. You know, it starts to move quickly from here. It seems like they have some sort of identification, very possibly from, at the very least, they may even have video now at this point of the individual.
Yeah, and this is where Paul was saying a very interesting thing just a few minutes ago. This is where the cooperation, not only among the internal law enforcement and intelligence services inside the UK, but also importantly, their connectivity to intelligence and law enforcement services across Europe and indeed across the world become critically important because you can triage and try to figure out what's going on, you know, right there on the scene at the moment. And I would defer to folks like Phil, who have probably a lot more experience in this, dealing with these sort of situations right up and close. But there's going to be, you know, hours, days, and weeks ahead where the sharing of intelligence and the sharing of this information to understand not only what happened here, but with the specific goal of trying to make sure that it doesn't happen again in the future, or if there's a plan afoot, at least you'll know what to look for. The other thing that Paul said was fascinating, which is absolutely true, is the increased usage of these point-to-point encryption systems that are commercially available. Anybody can download them from the app store of your choice, which really give terrorists and others who are trying to hide from the intercept capabilities of nation states like GCHQ on the British side and NSA. It's really pretty good protection, and has thwarted the attempts of intelligence and law enforcement to predict when the next attack is going to be. So that's a real growing problem. It's this clash that we have between open societies. How much are you going to monitor your citizens? How much are you going to be Big Brother and trying to figure out what's going on in citizens' communications, their movements, whether they're subject to searches right on the streets, all of which provides you better protection against terrorist attacks, but also which encroach to a certain extent on the liberties that those of us who live in democratic societies enjoy, which is precisely one of the things that I think terrorists are hoping to increase the tension there. So it's as this continues, it'll be interesting to see how all those threads play out.
Yeah, and just moments ago, Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May put out a statement, and it says in part, we are working to establish the full details of what is being treated by the police as an appalling terrorist attack. All our thoughts are with the victims and the families of those who have been affected. And we had been told that there would be a press conference about 20 minutes ago, so we are waiting. Obviously, police are incredibly busy right now, so it's understandable that this would be pushed back. But we obviously want to bring that to you live from Manchester Police as soon as they hold that press conference, and continue to be joined by Steve Hall, Paul Cruikshank, terrorism expert, Tom Fuentes, formerly with the FBI, and Andy and Phil Mudd as well. Tom, I mean, you're just joining us now. It does seem like kind of the pieces are now becoming clearer and clearer.
Well, I think they're becoming a little more clear, Anderson, but it's still very, very early in this. And a big factor, and I heard Phil mention it earlier, will be the type of bomb, how it was made, what bomb-making school basically the person followed, what kind of explosive material, the forensics that'll be done at the scene to get the explosive powder or residue back to the laboratory and determine what's the exact chemical composition of that. That'll help identify possible bomb makers.
This is a dumb question, but why would a bomb maker have such a distinctive signature that they could be identifiable over time?
Well, because when you're learning how to make a bomb, it's not like learning to be a French chef. If you make a bomb and at the end of the day have all 10 fingers, you stay with that recipe, and that creates the signature. And this is true for bomb-making schools and for the chemicals that are involved. So you see the bombs that have come out of Yemen, typically PETN, and they're made a certain way, and the wiring is done a certain way, the type of materials used to construct it. And then you see other schools that keep using different chemicals or different packaging, let's say, or different shrapnel with the bomb. So it's usually pretty distinctive. Or off the internet recipes as well. And we've had that. We've had individuals make bombs all by themselves. Big case in Canada in 2006, the Toronto 18. That individual made the first bomb by himself, detonated it, videoed it so he could use that as a recruiting tool. And then he used bigger and bigger amounts of the explosive, testing it out in the wooded area outside of Toronto. And then at the end, when he was getting ready to make an enormous bomb that would have been 3 times the size of the bomb used in Oklahoma City, that's when the police thwarted the case.
And Phil, we should point out, we don't know what kind of device, based on reporting from Evan Perez, Pamela Brown, they believe it's likely a suicide bomber, but again, we don't know if that means a suicide vest, some sort of device on the person. We saw the Tsarnaev brothers using pressure cooker bombs, but it's... as of now, we only know, and we have not heard from law enforcement directly, but of one individual so far.
That's right. When I saw that report, I'm presuming we don't know the name yet, that they actually found the physical suicide bomber. That alone, though, is a significant step forward. You're talking about fingerprints. You're talking about facial recognition. Presumably they found, if it's a backpack bomb, they found whether there's any information on that, including an ID card. So I'd expect overnight we transition to stage 2, and stage 1 is chaos. Stage 2 is identification of that first pinpoint piece of intelligence, name, fingerprint. Then you explode into saying, when I got that name, go to the phone company, go to the email, the internet service provider, go to every family friend. Your interviews are going to start happening when you find what apartments he's lived in. So by the time we come back to this in the morning, that information volume has sort of exploded exponentially.
And, I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail, but there is enough evidence at a scene like this that they couldn't get a fingerprint, that they can get some sort of identification based on physical evidence, not just from a CCTV camera image.
Depending on how the device exploded, I expect that if he's got half his body's still there. They're taking a picture of his face going around to people in Manchester who are part of extremist circles or to informants saying, you ever seen this guy? Somebody's going to say, my friend's missing, and be able to identify him. I'd expect a name by the morning.
Tom, you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, you know, not to be too gruesome, but body parts do survive these bombings. Even if the person's wearing the bomb, you know, pieces, whole fingers, whole hands can be recovered and could be fingerprinted, not to mention DNA. We don't know if this person possibly was a refugee and may have gone through some type of identification process.
Or if they have a prior record of some... What we have found time and time again, and Paul, you and I have talked about this repeatedly, particularly in the wake of Paris and Belgium, many of these people who were even born in countries, whether they're born in France or born in Belgium, were really petty criminals and kind of losers in life who, you know, took this on for one reason or another.
That's right. Many of those involved in ISIS plots in Europe, ISIS-inspired plots in Europe, from this sort of gangster jihad background, people who have become Islamized after they were radical, after they were part of gangs, people with a certain skill set in terms of operating clandestinely, in terms of evading attention from police, able to put together armed robberies or other types of criminality, people with access to weapons, explosives potentially from criminal contacts. And the fact that so many people with this background have joined ISIS, so many people with this background have acted on behalf of ISIS, has really given the terrorist group more firepower when it comes to its campaign of terrorism against Europe, against the West. Anderson.
And again, we are expecting some kind of on-camera briefing from authorities in Manchester. Our preliminary word is we'll be hearing from Ian Hopkins. He's the chief constable of Greater Manchester, the British equivalent of an American police chief or commissioner. A moment ago, I spoke with a man named Sam Ward, who lives by the arena, and he gave us as good a picture as any of what happened and what he was witnessing at that moment. Let's listen. And Sam, can you just explain what you heard and if you saw anything?
Yeah, so we heard an extremely loud bang. It was really sharp, really sudden, nothing like I've ever heard in the city centre before. So just as you was talking then, we've just had 7 ambulances exit the Manchester Central Fire Station, all with blue lights and sirens flashing, and really rushed down to the arena. I'm not too sure what's just happened, but there was a large amount of ambulances just left the venue then. I'm currently looking at a roadblock. There's at least another 25 ambulances positioned on the pavement, just almost literally sat there waiting. There's 5 or 6 fire engines that I can see, all with the crews stood by just as if they're waiting to be given the nod again to just go. A very, very, very large police presence, all from tactical aid units through to armed response, just to general police. I don't know if you can hear the sirens, but something is kicking off again, whether it's a second. It seems to be coming in waves, all the convoys. None of the vehicles seem to be moving on their own. They all seem to be 5 or 6 deep at any one time. The firemen are actually running into the fire station now. I'm not too sure what's happening. Yeah, it's just absolutely mental at the moment.
So, Sam, about how far away from this arena do you live, or are you?
I'm 200 meters. 200 meters from the arena, and I'm about 100 meters away from the city centre fire station, which is a very large city centre fire station. They've got two forecourts plus an overspill car park, which is all currently being occupied from everything from Salvation Army vehicles all the way through to the ambulances and the rapid response vehicles as well.
And Sam, have most of the people who were in the arena, I mean, we were told some 20,000 people were there, are they gone from the area now?
Yeah, the area is still, it's very quiet. It's very quiet for the city centre. Initially, after the first wave of sirens and the initial evacuation, it was filled with cars. The roads were absolutely bedlam, people just going through red lights. It was very much families. There was kids, mums and dads. They were all doing everything they could to get out of the city centre, and and it looks like the emergency services did a really good job of managing that traffic, because it was only sort of bedlam for about 5 minutes, and now the roads are extremely still. I'm not too sure if you can hear it, but we've got 2 helicopters above us, both hovering extremely low. You can almost feel the thud from the blades coming from them.
Sam, I appreciate you talking to us, and I appreciate your clear head in all this and describing what you were seeing right now. Sam Ward, thank you so much. That is some new video you're seeing that we are seeing also for the first time. Obviously, people being arriving at hospitals. 19 people dead, according to authorities at this point. Although, frankly, with this statement or press conference, we are expecting and awaiting at some point. We may get an update on that number. 19 killed, that so far confirmed by police, around 50 or so injured. And again, the full extent of their injuries we are likely to hear more about when police actually do give that press conference. But here you see some people arriving in the hospital. I do just want to give you by the way, Sam, when we were talking to Sam Ward, that was probably about 30 or 40 minutes ago. About 2 minutes later, after we stopped talking to him, we got word that police had found a package that they thought was suspicious, and they were going to have a controlled detonation. So what we think when Sam was saying that he sees things, looks like something else is kicking off more, people were running into the local fire station, we believe what he was actually witnessing was the run-up to that controlled detonation. So it's not that there was a second attack in any way, but that's what we believe he was witnessing, though at the time we weren't sure, and nor was he sure why there was suddenly an increase of activity, but we believe that's what it was. But I do just want to give you kind of a rundown of what we know, what we don't know, and a general kind of flow of events. We understand that this device, believed to be a suicide attack, a suicide device. You just heard the reporting that law enforcement believes they have identified the suicide attacker. We believe the device was exploded around 10:35 p.m. That, according to Manchester Police, as of 2 hours ago. They may update with a more exact time. It's not clear exactly where the device was detonated. We expect to hear more on that shortly. But from a number of eyewitnesses, people have talked about an area around a box office area that is basically there's a train station, above-ground train station, a Victoria Station, that's attached to this arena. And then it's about a 2-minute walk, I understand, from the train to the box office area. And then one would go through security. They had bag checks at this concert. We believe the explosion took place somewhere in what's been described as a foyer around the box office area, though, again, that's just based on a number of eyewitnesses. And as you all know, those can be unreliable. A number of people talked about coming through that area when they entered the venue, but when they left, they did not go through that area because that is where they believe that the device exploded. At 10:35 or so, the concert had just ended, according to a number of eyewitnesses. The lights had gone up. People had started to leave when the explosion itself took place. People inside the arena, and you see the arena there, heard the explosion. We're not clear of what it was. You can see a lot of pink things. Those are actually balloons that were part of the concert. Kind of, as you know, in concerts, they're thrown out into the crowds. Some people believe perhaps it was just a bunch of balloons popping. Others who were nearby said they could actually feel the detonation in their chest. They could feel it in the ground and obviously heard the sound. Some people who had been leaving the venue came back in, and then, according to a number of eyewitnesses who we have talked to over the last 2 hours, people just began to leave in the other direction. There was obviously a lot of concern as 20,000 people are trying to get out as quickly as possible from an arena. We talked to one man, Andy James, who was there with his 9-year-old brother. It was his little brother's first concert. Andy talked about walking out with his brother. His hand was on his brother's heart, and he could feel his little brother's heart kind of beating out of his chest. They, of course, thankfully got out safely. It's not clear exactly what sort of device was used. We do not yet know the identity of the person that the law enforcement seems to have located or identified who may have carried this attack out. Social media, a number of eyewitnesses credited social media with helping them get home. people online helping other people. One person was saying they needed to get to Liverpool. People online helped find them a ride. People were sharing rides. There were reports of local taxis turning off their meters and giving people rides just to get out of the area as quickly as possible. Obviously, it is very much a crime scene right now that is still being investigated, and we expect to hear from police hopefully very shortly for more information. We have been monitoring events with our Phil Black, or Steve Hall, Paul Cruikshank, Tom Fuentes, and Phil Mudd as well. That's basically, I think, I covered pretty much everything I can remember from the last 2 hours. But there's still, it's important also to point out all the things we don't know. I mean, and that's, I mean, I assume investigators do that as well. They work on what they can confirm, and then they don't make any suppositions of what they don't know.
That's right. In this case, you got to take a step back and go through almost a checklist. People are running around chasing all kinds of data. I used to have a checklist of 6 or 8 items. Where'd the money come from? The explosives, the radicalization, the travel. Obviously, are there conspirators involved in this effort? Is there a central cell in a place like Raqqa that was involved? So stepping down that, instead of just saying, what's coming across the transom today? What's the guy's name? You're stepping through saying, we know nothing about money, nothing about radicalization, nothing about travel, nothing about co-conspirators. So despite all the data that you laid out, I'm looking at this as a practitioner saying, we got about a 5% story so far, at best.
But if you identify the person, I mean, that seems to be the biggest break of all, and then you can start to move backwards, no?
That's correct. In the initial circle that you're looking at, that is, as soon as you've got his name, you can start checking off the box by looking at things like his bank accounts, his communications about whether somebody's wiring money in. You're obviously looking at those first-line communications saying, who did he speak with in the past 48 hours? But you still have a second circle that could take weeks or months. Let's say, and I don't think this will happen in this case, but let's say there's an international dimension. Starting to go back to determine who's at the core of that in a place like Syria so that you could get enough information for special forces to conduct a raid in 6 months. That's tough intel business, and that's the back end when you get an international conspiracy.
But it's interesting, Tom. I mean, a number of these online recruiters who were most well known, and I'm not adept enough to even remember their names, but there was a guy in Raqqa who was in touch with one of the Garland attackers who tried to strike in Garland, Texas, and got killed in that attack. He was targeted in a drone strike, killed in a drone strike. He was part of this group, I think they call them the Legion, that there's a guy at George Washington University who monitors a lot of their internet communication. There was a guy in Somalia who I think is still out there, an American in Somalia, who also was a big online recruiter. To me, it's very interesting that there's a whole unit in ISIS which is geared toward the encouragement of people overseas to stay in place and try to attack however they can.
Well, typically what they do, as in Garland, is that they recruit, and as soon as someone shows an interest, then they refer them to one of the dark apps that can't be traced, and then they can communicate secretly. So that's one of the big problems with this. I should add that the FBI has a huge office in London, and they will be providing assistance, and then, you know, going through the more than 80 offices around the world that the FBI has, plus domestically here, to look at their databases. Is there any information out there? Were there any phone calls intercepted? Were there any warnings or threats made, you know, by a group or by an individual or even by this person once they identify him? If they can identify his communication devices and get a hold of them, did the phone survive like we had in San Bernardino, the subject's phone? Did the laptop that he may own and have at home, you know, where does he live? Can they get their hands on that? And, you know, it seems to me that they identified this person fairly quickly. So that means this could be somebody that they were looking at already and just couldn't have enough personnel to keep tabs on him. Or someone else might have called the police and said, hey, this guy put out a manifesto or something earlier today that he was going to do something spectacular at this arena. So, but normally you wouldn't identify an individual that committed suicide with a bomb. Is usually going to be pretty tough to identify that soon.
But Tom, that's one of the difficult things for law enforcement, whether it's the FBI here in the United States or you know, MI5 in Britain or MI6, the Foreign Intelligence Service of Britain, is they can have a suspect, not related to this attack, but just in general, they can have somebody who they believe is interested in extremism. They can have, you know, a lot of suspicious things this person has done. They can follow somebody for years, but at a certain point, if that person hasn't acted, you can't stop somebody like that. I mean, at a certain, you can only devote resources to somebody for so long, no?
Oh, that's true. And I remember years ago when I was still in the FBI, meeting with the head of MI5 who said, we probably have 1,000 really good suspects, a couple hundred top-tier suspects that we should be watching. We can only do about 50 at a time. So they have to guess, use their best intelligence and their best intuition and make an educated guess of who they'll watch and then who they won't. And we've seen that in this country. No service anywhere in the world has the resources to put 24/7 coverage on these individuals for any extended period of time. And I ran a special operations squad for 2 years in the FBI. Full court press on one individual will take about 30 people.
Wow, really?
30 agents to do 24/7, 7 days a week, use aircraft, do the full coverage, which we did on organized crime figures, terrorism cases in those days. It's very, very difficult. No agency has those kind of resources.
And in order to devote those kind of resources, you have to be, you have to have a lot on that person to really believe that they may go active.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, you do.
You'll notice that the FBI doesn't talk about how many people they have under that kind of surveillance in the United States. That's because the number is so low. Exactly. It's not only 30 people on the ground. Remember, if they're communicating in a foreign language, you need translators, you need analysts to do the data analysis. Go back even further. You need lawyers to go to a judge to say, I want coverage on this person. You start multiplying that out against, let's say, only 10 subjects. You're already into hundreds of people. And the Bureau's got 35,000 covering everything from white-collar crime to gangs to terrorism. There are very few people you can put on that kind of coverage. And remember, too, they're looking for that coverage, and they'll make it. You can't do that.
I've followed on cases in the United States where FBI would run an informant on somebody for years in order to try to gather information about that person. And the FBI would come under criticism for the amount of money they paid that informant. In one case, it was like $130,000 over 6 years. Based on what you're saying, that's actually not that's not expensive, given if the alternative is running 30 agents on somebody for that length of time. That's millions.
And then you hear the criticism of the FBI that, well, this person was on the FBI's radar 6 years ago, and why isn't he still? Why aren't they still watching this guy? Well, that's a good example. You just can't. You can only narrow it down to the top ones you think and hope you're right.
Paul Cruikshank, at this point, given what we know based on CNN's reporting, based on what we heard from Pamela Brown and Shimon Perot-Kupez and Aaron Perez, where do you see the focus of this investigation? I mean, if they have learned if they've identified the attacker, I don't know if that means they have actually identified the person by name or just found enough to begin to get close to identifying this person by name. Where does it go from here?
Well, Anderson, as we've been discussing, they'll be reviewing all the CCTV, trying to figure out this individual's route, where they came from. They'll be doing all the forensics, the DNA analysis, the fingerprint analysis to see if they've got some kind of match, if this individual is on some kind of database, somebody who may have had a criminal record, as we've been discussing. So many of those that have got involved in ISIS terrorism in recent years have had criminal records, so trying to figure out who this individual is and who they're connected to. At this hour, there has not been any claim of responsibility, it has to be said, from any terrorist group, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, or any other group. It should be noted that in just the past few days, Al-Qaeda, through Hamza bin Laden, the son of Osama bin Laden, have called for attacks in the West. Hamza bin Laden is somebody who's been promoted through the ranks, who may even take over the entire Al-Qaeda organization one day. So they're not just looking at groups like ISIS, they're also looking at Al-Qaeda here, but quite possible that this could also just be one individual who managed to put this device together. Obviously, the more sophisticated the device is, the more powerful the device is, then the more likely it is that the individual in question would have had some kind of terrorist training overseas, instruction in how to do this. It's quite tricky to make bombs from the kind of chemicals that you can go and buy commercially on the streets of the United States and the United Kingdom, so it definitely helps if you've had some kind of practice, some kind of training. But I've got to say as well that ISIS are putting out more and more instructions out over the internet about how to make bombs. We've seen that from Al-Qaeda in Yemen too, who provided the detailed bomb-making instructions for the devices that were involved in the Boston bombings, but also the San Bernardino devices that attacker, those attackers in that attack left behind to try to target emergency services. But this is an investigation which will be pursued at a furious rate now in the hours ahead. I think we can expect the Prime Minister to convene the COBRA emergency cabinet, which comes together at times like this when there has been a major terrorist attack on UK soil. And that's what we're talking about here, a mass casualty terrorist attack, the first of that type since the London bombings all the way back in 2005.
Yeah, and Paul, again, I know I've been saying this for about an hour, but we continue to get a heads up that we expect a press conference any moment now. We obviously are going to bring that to you. We've talked about this a little bit, but I mean, the clock is ticking on this. Obviously, there are long-term issues to learn about this, but most immediately they need to find out, are there other people involved in this? Are there other people out there? Is there a cell right now in Manchester, England?
That's right, and the concern is that there could be follow-on attacks if there is a wider cell behind this. If there are a group of ISIS operatives, say, who've come back from Syria that have been dispatched to the United Kingdom to carry out a terrorist attack. We saw with the Paris-Brussels cell, they managed to launch this same cell in 2 cities. There are some signs they were also trying to plot an attack at Amsterdam airport as well. And so if you have a group of, say, 5 or 6 or even a dozen individuals, which was the number involved in the Paris and Brussels cell, they have the capacity to attack again. And so they're very worried as we move through towards the morning that there could be more people out there. And another thing that ISIS have been trying to pull off, and there's some intelligence on this, is to launch attacks sort of near simultaneously in various parts of a country, various parts of the European continent, all at the same time. Yeah. They want to get attacks through which are very spectacular, which are going to get a lot of media attention, to change the subject line to the fact they're losing a lot of territory in Syria and Iraq.
Yeah. Michael Weiss is joining us. He's a senior editor of the Daily Beast, author of the great book ISIS Inside the Army of Terror. Michael, you've been following this. You just tweeted out, whoever's responsible, the primary target was women and children. Keep that fact closely tethered throughout the night. I mean, these are young kids, many young kids at this Ariana Grande concert. It's a sickening thought that somebody is laying in wait for them to leave this arena in order to detonate this device. You've also pointed out, I've been reading your tweets online tonight, I mean, Manchester, there is a history here of radical Islamist extremism for quite a while. There was actually one of the largest al-Qaeda plots was hatched out of Manchester, wasn't it?
That's right. My colleague Robin Simcox at the Heritage Foundation pointed out that this was one of the largest attacks that fortunately was aborted or interrupted by the British security services. Abid Nazir, a Pakistani national who was actually extradited to the United States by the UK, and on in his trial in Brooklyn, when he was cross-examining the British cop who had essentially raided his home and found all these devices and information and material suggesting he was planning this attack on one of the most crowded marketplaces in Manchester, said, "Oh, it's great to hear a Mancunian accent." So just another grim reminder that a lot of these attacks on the continent in the UK come from native sons who were born there and who are afforded every opportunity. Their parents might have immigrated, but they grew up essentially as Brits, as Frenchmen, as Germans. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out if this was either a native Manc or somebody who had spent his entire life in the UK. And to your point, yes, this is a concert, these are, the cliche is they're soft targets. I don't know there's anything particularly soft about the carnage that's being perpetrated, but here you have a band that caters to a certain demographic, young teenage girls. So this will have been chosen. If this was, and again, I want to sort of issue the caveats that we don't know exactly what's happened yet. I don't want to get ahead of my skis on this. But if this was an act of Islamist or al-Qaeda or ISIS perpetrated or executed terrorism, they will have planned to kill as many women and children as possible. And what they'll do to justify it is they'll say, you, the Crusader conspiracy that's ranged against the Sunni Ummah, you're killing our daughters and our women and our children in Syria and Iraq. That's their moral equivalence. That's the argument they trotted out when they immolated the Jordanian pilot in a cage several years ago. That's the argument they always trot out. It's always about, eye for an eye justice. But there's nothing just or defensible about this. This was an act of mass murder in an industrialized, one of the most civilized countries. I mean, the UK for me is a second home. I lived there for 2.5 years. I got married there. I have family that come from there. It hits me very personally when I see this happen. And as Paul points out, yes, the attack in Westminster several weeks ago, for ISIS, that will have been sort of a busted flush. It didn't kill as many people as they would have liked. This, when the death toll is 20 people and probably going to escalate if this was indeed some kind of shrapnel-laden explosive device or a nail bomb, this is the kind of attack they're looking to perpetrate.
On the phone is Amy Scarisbrick, and again, we are awaiting this press conference. Amy's a broadcaster at a local radio station. She is on the scene. Amy, what's happening on the scene right now?
Well, I'm at the back of the Manchester Arena, which is a huge arena here in the UK. It's all cordoned off. About a 3-mile cordon has been set up, and it's by a shopping centre, and there's around about 70, 80 police cars here. The blue and red lights from the police car are lighting up the night sky. Above me, a helicopter circling around the arena. It's been up there for about 3.5 hours now, and as I speak, victims are still being ferried away from the scene. A police officer here told me that he's having to divert ambulances through the city because they're not from this local area. They've come from all over the UK to try and help with this massive effort. And they don't know where they're going, so they're coming backwards and forwards, sirens just ringing through the night sky.
In most of I mean, I assume now, given that this is, we're now 4+ hours since this incident, everybody who was injured, wounded at the scene, they've already been taken to hospitals, yes?
Yes, most people have been taken to hospital. A few are still loitering about here, just in shock. I've seen so many families, so many little girls wearing baby pink Ariana Grande T-shirts, girls as young as 7 or 8, crying their eyes out, holding hands, just saying to their mums and dads, please get me as far away from here as possible. And there was dramatic scenes here. Less than an hour ago, there was a controlled explosion by a hotel that I'm standing by now. Police found an item of clothing. It wasn't a suspicious item. Police officers pushed me back dramatically, and there was a bang, a huge bang, which just ripped through the night sky. The ground shook. It was that loud. And so many girls and women were screaming because it was just absolutely terrifying.
And many, I understand many people, when they left the venue, they went to local hotels, even if they can't stay there. They just went to go someplace away that was safe and inside.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm standing opposite one of those hotels right now. People who are getting cups of tea, cups of coffee, phone chargers for people so they can check in on Facebook to say that they're safe. They haven't got rooms, as you say. They're just in the lobbies, hanging around, not too sure what to do. I mean, as I look across the road now into the glass windows of this one hotel, there's a man there crying his eyes out, rubbing his eyes, just in shock, not too sure what to do. And the streets around Manchester have just become a ghost town. They've fallen silent.
I understand. We talked to one person who was trying to get to Liverpool and went on social media, and that people are trying to help each other kind of get rides, that even local taxis had turned off meters to give rides to people.
Yes, because the cordon's so big, it's quite hard to get in and out of the city at the moment. So yes, taxi drivers are picking people up. At hotels, as you said, that they're picking up children, they're picking up families. They're just trying to get people safe because after that controlled explosion, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't feel safe around here yet. So people are just trying to get as far away from here as possible.
Amy, I appreciate your reporting for us tonight. Thank you very much, and be careful out there. Here back, obviously, monitoring events with Paul Cruikshank, with Michael Weiss, Tom Fuentes, Phil Mudd as well. Paul, in terms of the resources that the British have compared to what we have seen in France and the problems we've seen in France, the problems we've seen in Belgium, it seems like the British intelligence forces and also law enforcement have a better handle on things than we have seen in some other countries in Europe.
Yeah, Anderson, I think there's some consensus that the Brits are best in class when it comes to dealing with these sort of counter-terrorism issues. They've been dealing with it really all the way back to the IRA threat from the 1970s onwards. That meant they had to get very smart very quickly when it came to dealing with terrorism threats. They developed a lot of expertise. They made sure that their domestic security services and their police services worked hand in glove, that they had staff working in each other's buildings, that they were sharing intelligence in real time. And this has really resulted in the UK thwarting plot after plot since 9/11. There really have not been a large number of plots that have got through. The ones that have are the London bombings, of course, back in 2005, and more recently that attack on Westminster Bridge, which resulted in 4 people, including a policeman, being killed. But they've had a remarkably high success rate. The problem is that the threat is as big as it has ever been. When it comes to Islamist terrorism, the system really is blinking red. Officials have been warning about this for some time. Here in the United Kingdom, there have been 900 or so British residents who've gone off and fought in Syria and Iraq, joined groups like ISIS. Hundreds have come back, and there are thousands of individuals in the United Kingdom who hold Islamist extremist views, who are supportive of ISIS, who will be cheering, if you can believe this violence, this carnage, this unspeakable terror tonight in Manchester.
Yeah, you know, Phil, and just in terms of the level of sophistication of this attack, you know, the most recent attack we saw in England was, as Paul mentioned, the man who drove the car along Westminster Bridge and then got out and stabbed people. Relatively low-level sophisticated attack. I mean, they just needed a car and a knife. This, at least, is kind of another step in that you need to manufacture some sort of device.
It is. Somebody had to learn how to manufacture this. You can't do that overnight. But the first question I look at in terms of sophistication is whether there's more than one person. As soon as you get more than one person, you've not only got planning, you've got an increased likelihood that they've reached overseas, they've traveled together, they've spoken with other people about the conspiracy. When you've got one person, intelligence lives off mistakes. You've got to talk to the wrong person, email the wrong person. When you've got one person, the likelihood that that individual is going to make a mistake, they're not talking to anybody else, obviously, lowers, and the likelihood you can catch them also lowers.
But if it's one person, if it's more than one person, it's probably more than 2 people, because to go out and recruit someone, to recruit somebody, if it's not the same person, I would assume it would require more than one person to go out and find somebody. You've got to kind of ask around, I would think.
That's right, and that's one reason that you get more potential threat from larger conspiracies, but more opportunity from people like me. They go out searching for a greater capability, who can train us, who can provide the explosives. They talk to a radicalizer, so there's opportunity and cost with bigger conspiracies.
Yeah, there's still obviously a lot to be learned. We know this device was detonated around 10:35 p.m. local time. It is now, let's see, it's 10 o'clock here, so it's 2 a.m. 3 a.m. right now, almost 3 a.m. In Manchester. We anticipate a press conference from police at some point. We've been waiting for it some point, but we are told it is going to take place. Our CNN coverage continues throughout the night. Obviously, I want to turn things over right now to Don Lemon.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Anderson, thank you so much. Much more on our breaking news now. 9 people confirmed dead, around 50, if not more, injured at the Ariana Grande concert in Manchester. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. We're awaiting a news conference. It's going to happen at any moment. But I need to tell you that a Western law enforcement official is now telling CNN a male at the scene in Manchester has been identified as the probable suicide bomber in this event. A U.S. official said suicide bombing is now considered to be the likely reason for this blast. It happened just before 10:35 p.m. That was local time. This as audience members, tens of thousands of them, many of them young people, mostly young girls, teenage girls or preteens leaving that Manchester arena. Witnesses describe a huge explosion, chaos, victims, and injured people on the ground. And again, I must tell you, we're awaiting a news conference. That news conference is supposed to happen at the 9 p.m. Eastern hour here in the United States. It has not happened yet, and we're awaiting it. That, as soon as it happens, we'll bring it to you live. Let's get you up to date on the details and what's possibly behind this now. I want to go straight to CNN senior international correspondent, and that is Phil Black. Phil joins us now. Phil, I have to ask you, this was the first of 3 Ariana Grande concerts in the UK. What can you tell us about what happened?
Don, Ariana Grande had walked off the stage only moments before. People had begun streaming out of the arena. As you say, tens of thousands of people filled this space, screaming fans. They were walking outside. And it seems from witness accounts and from what we're hearing from the venue management itself, that's where the explosion took place, outside of the arena, in what the arena management described.
Phil, I need to cut you off. We're going live to that press conference now. Here it is.
Manchester Arena in the city centre. This was at the conclusion of the Ariana Grande concert. Currently, we have 19 people confirmed to have lost their lives in the explosion and around 50 casualties that are being treated at 6 hospitals across Greater Manchester. My thoughts are very much with those that have been injured and lost their lives and their loved ones at this terrible time. We are doing all that we can to support them. Officers from Greater Manchester Police and Emergency Services are working at the scene and are supporting those affected. We are coordinating the operation here at Greater Manchester Police Headquarters. An emergency number is available for all those concerned about their loved ones or anyone who may have been in the area. The number is 0161 856 9400. We are currently treating this as a terrorist incident until we have further information. We are working closely with National Counter-Terrorism Policing Network and UK intelligence partners. This is clearly a very concerning time for everyone. We're doing all that we can, working with local and national agencies to support those affected as we gather information about what happened last night. As you will understand, we are still receiving information and updates, so we'll provide further detail when we have a clearer picture. I want to thank people for their support and ask them to remain vigilant, and if they have any concerns at all, to report them to the National Anti-Terrorist Hotline. The number is 0800 789 321. It is important also that people here in Manchester avoid the area around Manchester Arena so that emergency services can continue to effectively deal with the incident at that location. Thank you very much.
Have there been any arrests, Chief Constable?
That was the Chief Constable there, Ian Hopkins, reporting on this, giving us the very latest on this information, saying that they're asking for help and gave out a number that, of course, you can use in the UK for anyone who may have seen or may have information on this. He said right now they're investigating this, obviously, as a terror incident, as has been reported by the media and by CNN, of course. Also saying that they're working with national counterterrorism experts to try to figure out exactly what happened here. And they also want people to avoid the area around the arena until they get a handle on what's going on and collect any evidence. But again, at least 19 people have died in this incident. About 50 people are injured, possibly more. And again, they're investigating it as a terrorist incident. It happened 10:40 p.m. Local time. There in Manchester. They believe it happened near the ticket office, if not inside of the arena, just outside of the arena at the entrance. It is 3 a.m., 3:05 a.m. Manchester time, of course 10:05 Eastern time here in the United States. The eyewitness accounts of what happened there are just really unbelievable. People saying they heard an explosion. Some witnesses saying in the beginning they were told that some of the balloons had been going off, thinking that it was a celebration to end the concert as Ariana Grande was wrapping up her last song, Dangerous Woman, on stage when this happened. And again, they said thousands of young girls, mostly young girls there, their parents were in the process of picking them up. Some of the children left early, about 5 minutes out before the concert, so that they could meet their parents outside. Those young girls obviously are people caught up in the incident, parents witnessing the incident as well. Again, 19 people believed to be dead so far, and they're still gathering more information. Again, our correspondent Phil Black with more information on the scene. Phil, we were in the middle of discussing this. You heard what the Chief Constable said. What more can you tell us about this incident?
What we can talk about, I guess, Don, is what we've been hearing from the witnesses through the night, and that is their sheer terror, if you like, in the moments that followed the explosion. So what we heard from witnesses initially was that, yes, it seemed that the explosion was outside the venue itself. We've seen venue from within inside the venue in the moments afterwards, and that was where you hear the panic, the screaming, the frantic efforts of people to escape. What they were rushing towards was the scene of the blast itself. We understand it took place in a public space just outside the venue there, and it was that blast, we believe, that was responsible for the 19 people who were killed, perhaps 50 or so who were injured. And what you heard there from the police is that they are treating this as a terror attack until they have reason to consider it otherwise. It's pretty clear, we think, that that is the definite direction that the investigation is now heading in. And so from the hours since, what they have been doing is, first of all, getting emergency services and first responders to the scene to help the injured, those who so desperately need that assistance, while also locking down the area and ensuring that there is no further threat. The crucial point about the location is that it appears to have taken place outside the hard security perimeter whereby people enter and exit the arena itself. That's where the searches take place. That's where people's bags are inspected. People are often patted down. That's where it's almost impossible to get some sort of device past the security perimeter that exists there. So what appears to have happened is, as the concert was just finishing, people were just leaving the venue in a public area that is not as secure, just outside the concert venue. That's where this blast has taken place. And in the moments that followed, well, we've heard from witnesses that it was simply absolute panic. The video points to that. You can hear the people screaming, as you've touched on. We are talking about teens, young people, perhaps children with their parents. These are the people that were caught up in the crush, the desperate effort to escape the venue when they first heard that blast. And they've talked about hearing this incredibly loud blast from within the venue itself, which gives you a sense of just what we're talking about here in terms of size. So that's where we're at. The police are clearly trying to coordinate their intelligence services, counter-terrorism police as well. And they, as we heard there, they said they'll tell us more once they have more. But a very bare basic briefing from the police at this point, some hours after the incident, Don.
Absolutely. Phil Black joining us. Phil, that target outside of the arena is what's known as the soft target area, the soft zone that is very hard to secure. Again, if it is terrorism, the person who had this bombing device may not have been allowed to get past security, or may not have been able to get past security just because security is so strict, and the bomb exploded outside. And again, I need to tell you that this is according to information that was gathered from our Pamela Brown and our sources here at CNN. Western law enforcement officials told CNN that a male at the scene in Manchester has been identified as the probable suicide bomber here. And the U.S. official said suicide bombing is now considered to be the likely reason, again, for this blast. Again, this blast happening 10:35 p.m. Outside of the ticket office there at the Manchester Arena. I want to bring in now CNN's justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Evan, now we have 19 people, at least 19 people who have died in this, maybe more injured, more than 50 injured or so. A male at the scene, as I just said, has been identified as the probable suicide bomber. What are your law enforcement sources saying tonight?
That's right, Don. That's what U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies have been getting from their counterparts in the United Kingdom. At this point, they believe they've identified a male who is the probable suicide bomber. At this point, they only believe that there was one bomber who carried this attack out, and they also believe that this person may have waited for the end of the concert, when you have all those kids, all the concert goers coming outside of the venue. He struck right outside the venue. People obviously inside were able to hear and feel the force of the blast as it occurred. But at this point, again, these are ongoing, these are theories, early theories for these law enforcement and intelligence agents and officials who are looking at the scene there and are trying to collect some of this information. And one of the things that they're doing, Don, is waiting to see if there could be an analysis of the residue that from this blast, to see if it matches any of the recipes that are well known for terrorist groups. We know that ISIS has put out recipes for some of its followers to try to construct some of these rudimentary bombs, and so they're trying to see if they can collect some of that evidence and perhaps do some analysis to see if it gives them any initial clues of where this attacker might have gotten the idea, the recipe, the ability to make this explosive device.
Having said that, speaking to your sources here in the United States, as you know, when something like this happens overseas, U.S. law enforcement react to it as well. So what does that mean for law enforcement here in the United States now?
It means a late night for all these folks. Some of them were heading home, Don, at the time that this occurred, and they turn right back around. And because, you know, when this happens, they also immediately think of the possibility that, you know, these groups could be trying to coordinate things in other places, and they want to know, they want to help the United Kingdom to see if there's any information that they might have in the U.S. intelligence system that could help them try to get to the bottom of this. And one of the things that U.S. agencies can do, at least because, you know, they're still staffed at this point, it's overnight in the U.K., one of the things that they're quickly able to do is look at social media to see if anybody in that region was doing anything at that point or making any statements that might give you a clue of what might have happened here. So they're scouring social media. You're looking to see whether or not there's anybody who is on the U.S. radar who was of concern in the Manchester area. We know, we've talked to officials in the United Kingdom, and MI5 in particular have said that one of their big concerns are the returnees, people who went to Syria to fight for ISIS and other groups and have come back, and they're very concerned about them concentrating in areas of the United Kingdom, including in London, in the Midlands, and in the Manchester area. These are areas, concentrations, there's a lot of them, and they're trying their best to keep an eye on them, Don.
So we heard from the folks in the UK, from British police, a constable there asking for help, saying now that it is being investigated as a terrorist incident until they find out otherwise or they know exactly what it is. And now U.S. Homeland Security is reacting. Evan, I want to get your response to this. DHS says that they have no information to indicate a specific credible threat involving music venues in the United States. Evan Perez.
Right, and this is very, very common. One of the first things they do is to see whether or not there's any threats that they're picking up, certainly from the intelligence streams that are coming in constantly, to see if there's any indication that there could be a threat here in the United States. Obviously, at this hour, you have concert venues across this country that are having concerts, and they're letting out right about now, and so you probably will see a higher police presence in some of the big cities in the United States, just as an abundance of caution. We see this in almost every type of incident like this, and I wouldn't be surprised if people coming out of concerts here in Washington, in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, they'll see more police on the ground, just simply because when things like this happen, others might get the idea that now is the time for them to do something similar, Don.
Yeah, and the question is about our national security apparatus. We hear about those threat levels in incidents like this. What does this have to do? What does this do to the apparatus and are they on higher alert tonight? I
got to tell you, they're already on as high alert as you can be. I mean, it's certainly one of the things that crosses the mind of every person who works in this field, in national security, that at any time something like this could happen here. Obviously, we've been lucky we haven't had anything like this, but they've been expecting. Again, we're coming up in the summer in Europe. They're looking for an uptick in this type of activity across the continent and in the United Kingdom, simply because you have so many of these people being pressured by the advance against ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and they're coming home. They're flooding back. They're trying to sneak back in any way they can, and they probably haven't changed their stripes. They're going to try to do something at home, not at their back.
All right. Evan Perez, our justice correspondent, reporting on this. And if you're looking, just joining us, obviously this is a cell phone video from inside that arena. That explosion happening earlier, 10:40 p.m. There, Manchester time. They are plus 5 hours ahead of us. It's 10 p.m. here now, 3 a.m. in Manchester. Some of the people who were there telling CNN that they heard an explosion at this concert just as it was ending, saying there was smoke everywhere in the main corridor outside the arena and the staging area. Again, according to our fellow Black, they believe it happened just outside of the entrance. Witnesses saying it was a really big explosion. Everybody started screaming and running. There were people on the floor. There was a lot of confusion. And again, social media posts from this scene showed panicked concert goers, as you are seeing now, running down the arena stairs in an attempt to get away from this really madness, just chaos inside of the Manchester arena. According to the British constable, now they're asking for help, and they gave out a number for if you're there in the Manchester area in England. They're asking you to call them, again, being investigated as a terrorism event, a terrorist attack. And working with their national counterterrorism experts. And I would imagine that is folks here in the United States as well. asking people to avoid the area because they have lots of evidence to collect at this particular point. Let's turn now to our experts here at CNN, our terrorism analyst Paul Cruikshank, and also national security analyst Julia Kayyem. Michael Weiss, also an investigative reporter for International Affairs. Good evening to all of you. A horrible event happening in Manchester. Greater Manchester Police, Paul, are treating this as a terrorist incident. You heard them in the briefing just moments ago. Didn't take any questions, just gave a statement. Why is that their operating theory at this point in time?
Well, because it appears there was a suicide bomber involved, and that, of course, points to terrorism and actually also points you towards Islamist terrorism. There has not been any claim of responsibility yet from any terrorist group. Al-Qaeda and ISIS haven't put out any official statements yet, but I can tell you that on social media, people who are supportive of ISIS, of other jihadi groups, are celebrating right now. They see this as a success. But we'll have to see what this was and who was responsible and whether there was a wider cell that was involved in this attack. And we saw with the Brussels and Paris attacks that those were carried out by an ISIS cell with more than a dozen operatives that had come back to Europe to carry out those attacks. Are we dealing here in the United Kingdom now with a large cell which could strike again, or is this an isolated individual who perhaps learned how to make the bomb over the internet? All those questions are urgent at this hour, Don.
And we keep saying that it's 50 people or so. According to the information just into CNN regarding the hospitals, we're getting this from the Manchester hospitals and the Manchester Ambulance Service. They're saying the UK Northwest Ambulance Service has tweeted that they have taken 59 casualties from the Manchester incident to various hospitals and treated a number of walking wounded on the scene. They believe, Julia Kayyem, it's early on, they believe that there are probably more casualties, more injured at this point. But as of now, 19 people confirmed dead, 50 or so they are saying injured, and that's probably 50 or more is probably a better way of putting it. Julia Kayyem, I just want to get your response to this. The Manchester Arena tweeted this, that we can confirm that there was an incident as people were leaving the arena. The Ariana Grande show last night, the incident took place outside the venue in the public space. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims. Please follow GM Police or Twitter for all further updates. Just outside the arena in a public place. What does that tell you, Julia Kayyem?
Well, that this was the ultimate soft target because it was a very sort of dense area with a target of young children. I mean, these are tween girls. These are, Ariana Grande is, you know, this is the 12, 13, 14-year-old crowd. The pictures you were showing earlier, Don, I don't know if you noticed it, there are parents on the other side. This happens a lot. Any of us who have kids, you wait on the other side, they go in, have fun. That is what you're dealing with. And so the most important thing right now, since we don't know where everyone is family unification. I've done disasters throughout my career. It's the thing that motivates every person is, where is my child? And so what you're seeing now is on social media, there's a lot of focus. There's a hotel nearby where family unification is happening. That way they will be able to figure out, is 19 the only casualties we have, and it's the 50 plus in hospitals the only ones that are missing, because we just have a data problem, not to sound, you know, too objective about it, but you just have a numbers problem right now. So that kind of communication is ongoing online and social media, and the most important thing is family unification so that they can get a handle of how many fatalities they actually have. And then, of course, you're dealing with parents who are probably absolutely terrified right now until they actually reach their children.
Yeah, and
this one, I have to say, you know, this...
Go on.
Sorry, I mean, this one, you know, I have to say, you know, I know I'm like, you know, objective analyst. This one is just, you know, no victims of terrorism are more or less deserving, but it takes sort of a special kind of cruelty to target this concert. As I said, anyone who knows Ariana Grande knows that she's in that sweet spot of those 11 to 15-year-old girls, and he knew exactly what he was doing if it is in fact this male terrorist that we're hearing about.
Absolutely. The youngest victims, as they say in all of this, children at this point, Juliet. And as you were saying, Juliet, you were right. If you look at that initial video where they're coming down the stairs, you see parents just standing there and they are waiting for their helplessly and hopefully waiting that their children will come out of that arena. There you see the woman there in the pink and red, and also you can tell that's parents there as the children and concert goers are running down these steps. And I can only imagine being a parent, not knowing what's going on, and then hoping that you will see your child come running down these stairs in your arms. So just awful. Michael Weiss, I want to bring you in and get your thoughts on this as we learn more about this incident.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that we don't know still. I would agree with Paul that all indications point to some act of Islamist terrorism, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS remains to be seen. I would remind you, though, that the fact that this took place outside of the venue, that's not necessarily because that was the target. The target can have easily been inside the venue. Recall during the Paris attacks that one of the suicide bombers in that 10-man attack ring detonated his explosive device outside the Stade de France and ended up not killing nearly as many people as he might have done had he been inside the venue. So we might be looking at a situation where, as awful as the butcher's bill is on this attack, something like 20 dead, 59 casualties, the death toll is probably going to rise given the nature of this kind of attack. It could have been actually a lot worse. And, Manchester was the site, or the prospective site, of one of the largest Al-Qaeda plots in Europe. There was a Pakistani guy who was actually extradited to the United States in 2009, I believe, raised in Manchester, was looking to detonate a device much like this in a crowded marketplace there, could have killed scores of people, hundreds of people. And the telling anecdote about him is that when he was cross-examining the British cop who raided his apartment and found all the materials, the incriminatory evidence, said, "Oh, it's nice to hear a Mancunian accent," because he was on trial in Brooklyn. So this just goes to show the nature of these attacks, particularly in Europe, tend to be not by people who are coming back from war zones or from terrorist havens, although that can sometimes be the case, but from native sons who have grown up in these communities and come from these countries and are afforded every opportunity. And the process of radicalization takes place over many months and years, if not decades. Just on a final point, recall Jihadi John, Mohammed Emwazi, the guy who did the gruesome beheadings of Western hostages in ISIS, which was a preliminary of the U.S. intervention in Syria and Iraq. Also came from the UK. Father was a black taxi driver, which is a fairly middle-class profession in London and the outskirts, so did fairly well for himself. Mwazi, I think, was an engineering student and tried to go off to Somalia to join al-Shabaab and was on MI5's terrorism watch list. I would not be surprised. Unfortunately, this is always, you could write this script with a crayon at this point. Every time something bad like this happens, we find out after the fact that this was somebody who was being surveilled or who did have a rap sheet of some kind. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case here as well.
Okay, I need you guys to stand by because I want to get to someone. Stand by, please. I want to get to Karen Ford. Karen was at the concert tonight in Manchester. Joins me now by phone. Karen, thank you for joining us. Sorry you had to witness this. As I understand, you said everyone was getting out of their seats, walking towards the stairs, when all of a sudden a huge sound, sounded like an explosion, went off. Take us through it.
Yes, the concert had just finished. I was there with my 13-year-old daughter. It's her birthday this weekend. And Ariana Grande had just departed from the stage. And the lights came on, so everyone stood up. We started to walk towards the staircase to take us out of the building, and all of a sudden, from the opposite corner of the arena, there was a huge bang, which sounded like an explosion. Everyone stopped and just looked at each other for a few seconds. Then someone suddenly shouted bomb. So then everyone went into a frenzy and everyone was panicking and people were just pushing and trying to get out of the building. And there'd been a lady in a wheelchair who was trying to get out with her partner. It was just awful, awful, awful.
Mm-hmm. As I understand, Karen, and I'm not sure if you were in the area, but they said that They thought that it may have been balloons to sort of celebrate the end of the concert. Did you hear that? Go on.
Yes, well, Ariana had dropped about 200 or 300 huge pink balloons during one of the second or third songs to the end. I try to tell some of the children, because the problem was there was lots of children there on their own. They're like 12, 13, 14 years old, whose parents were outside. So these children were all crying, were really upset. So I'm trying to say, oh, it's a balloon that's exploded. It's just a balloon. It's not a bomb. But everyone was pushing, and people were starting to become crushed. And then once we actually got through the doors, all of the employees of Manchester Arena had disappeared. There was nobody there. There was no one to direct us where to go. There was no one to organise it, to tell people to be calm. And then just everybody ran, obviously, out of the building onto the streets, and it was just mayhem on the streets. There were children crying, trying to get in contact with the parents. There were parents on their phones who obviously were upset. They were crying, trying to get in contact with the kids. It was just an awful thing to witness and to be involved in.
Yeah, just chaos as you are describing it.
Yeah.
And as I understand, you said that people tried to push past a woman in a wheelchair as children screamed. You said, but you didn't see any smoke, just the very loud bang. And your husband thought it was two explosions?
So, yes, but maybe it could have been just something. There was lots of police cars then coming, so yeah, but he thought he'd heard two, but most people did think they just heard one. So, but my husband and some were outside, but they were parked probably about half a mile away from the arena, but they heard the bang quite easily, and they came running down to us. He tried to film me, but obviously the cell coverage wasn't very good because everybody was on the phones. So eventually we got into contact, and we did meet up.
Yeah, Karen, there's lots of moving parts here. Did you see any of the injured or any of the sadly injured victims?
No, we didn't even know it was actually a bomb until we live in Sheffield, which is about 40 minutes away from Manchester, and we were halfway home. And on the radio, it kept saying, like something had happened, they think it's a bomb. And then eventually they said there'd been 19 fatalities. So we didn't know until we were nearly home that people had actually died, that they'd gone to a concert with the family, with the children, and they're not going home tonight.
Awful.
Very.
How's your daughter?
Can't imagine.
How's your family?
Shaken, very shaken. She loved the concert. She was in awe of Ariana Grande. She just loved it. And then, obviously, for it to end like this, it's just not a very good birthday, but she's alive. I brought my baby home, which some parents won't be tonight, will they?
No. Karen Ford, an eyewitness to all of this, bringing her 13-year-old daughter to that concert for her birthday party, her birthday celebration, and it ended in, sadly, in tragedy for so many. Karen, thank you so much. We're glad that your family is okay, and we appreciate your time here on CNN. Karen saying that she heard the explosion, everyone getting out of their seats, walking towards the stairs, trying to run out, right as that last song was being sung by Ariana Grande. Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria GPS, joins me now. Fareed, it is an awful, awful story. You heard Ms. Ford say, you know, she brings her baby home tonight, but there are parents whose children won't be coming home, sadly. I want to get your take on this breaking news.
Well, first, one has to just react as a human being, and in my case, as a father of two girls, a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old, both of whom are great Ariana Grande fans. My 9-year-old has a big poster of Ariana Grande above her bed and has often asked if she could go to an Ariana Grande concert. And so I can so easily imagine myself one of those parents. It's devastating, it's heartbreaking. Sadly, this is something that we might have expected, not this particular event, but for the last year, terrorism experts, officials, Obama administration officials, others, have been saying that as ISIS is squeezed and loses territory and weapons and financing in the Middle East, people are going to come back, as some of your reporting has said, but also ISIS has been calling on people, supporters, well-wishers, to engage in precisely this kind of jihadi activity. They have been suggesting go out, cafes, concerts. This is the playbook that ISIS has been suggesting. Of course, we know it from the Paris theater attacks. And surprisingly, we thought we had kind of escaped it for a while. But it's a reminder that this problem of jihadi terrorism, of radical Islamic terrorism, let's call it what it is with us, is still alive. It still takes very few people to cause a great deal of damage. That remains the terrible calculus here, which is we don't know how many people we're talking about. Was this a lone guy? Was it 5 people? Was it 10? What we do know is it could be very, very small numbers that can inflict a great deal of damage.
Yeah. The UK, Fareed, as you discussed in your program and we talked about here before, and because of all the past incidents, under constant threat of terrorism attacks. But has there been any indication that the UK was more susceptible than usual in recent weeks, months, days?
Again, if you broaden the framework to months, yes, officials have been saying that as ISIS is losing ground, a lot of these people are returning. And where are they returning? They're returning to France, Belgium, Britain. Those are the countries that a lot of these people came from. As Michael Weiss was pointing out, remember Jihadi John. And also that they are trying to encourage well-wishers, fellow travelers, and for a variety of reasons. Britain, and particularly the cities outside of London, Birmingham, Manchester, seem susceptible to these marginalized groups or quasi-assimilated groups of immigrants. And so, yeah, again, not in any sense this particular event. I don't mean to in any way suggest that any officials or agencies did anything wrong. How on earth could you know this particular person was going to do something? But unfortunately, there have been plenty of warnings that as ISIS loses at home, it will lash out abroad.
Mm-hmm. Fareed, just initially, they're talking about this being a suicide bomb and saying also that there was shrapnel. Shrapnel may have been used, which would be nails. And so my question to you is, if it turns out to be that, is there anything about this attack or the manner in which it was carried out that might give us an idea about who was behind it or how big of an operation it was or is?
So far, not really, other than the fact that this is a fairly classic, I hate to put it this way, but Sunni jihadist attack. It's kind of nihilistic. It has no political purpose other than simply to destroy. It is very much in the ISIS Al-Qaeda playbook. And it reminds us, I suppose, in a sense, that this is the great problem we have. People talk about Iran, people talk about all the other problems, but the core problem that threatens the Western world right now remains this problem that we were introduced to so brutally on 9/11 in the United States, which is a kind of a cult of nihilism, extremism, and jihad that has grown up in countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and has transmogrified into this terrible thing that, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And it is brutal, it is merciless, it is nihilistic. There is no political agenda. Think about that, Don. For most of our experience over the last 30 or 40 years, terrorists have objectives. They, whether it was the IRA, there was always some purpose behind it. This is terrorism simply for the sake of killing people, a kind of nihilistic act of violence where violence has almost become the end in and of itself. And this is a signature, this is a hallmark of this kind of modern Sunni jihadi terrorism that we've seen coming in, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda.
For 30 hours just before this, the president had issued a call against terrorism. Of course, this is all happening in the middle of the president's trip to the Middle East, his first foreign trip since taking office, Reed. There has been no official, I should say, response yet from the White House tonight. But this weekend, the president made a speech in Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned, on the topic of Islam to the leaders of over 50 Muslim countries. The president spoke about Islamist extremism and terrorism and the need for leaders in the Muslim world to come together to fight it. Does this just drive that message home?
It does drive that message home. I hope that those measures, the Saudis have announced these kind of measures many times before, and yet they continue in many ways to support a religious establishment that preaches a kind of intolerance and exclusion that feeds this kind of jihad. I think, again, it reminds us, a lot of the president's speeches and talks and policy have been directed against Iran and have been accommodating towards Saudi Arabia and some of those other key Arab states. It's a reminder that the danger we face, the terrorism we face, has historically emanated out of Saudi Arabia. It has emanated out of the Sunni Arab world. We don't know yet, but I think it is highly likely that the terrorist we're talking about right now comes out of that tradition. All of them prior to this point have come out of that tradition. And while, yes, there are geopolitical issues with Iran, I think it would be a mistake to sign on too quickly to a kind of Saudi agenda, Saudi foreign policy. This is one reminder that that this problem of radical Islamic terrorism emanates out of the heart of the Arab world, has been funded, fueled, encouraged by countries like Saudi Arabia. And let's hope that they can now finally turn a corner, finally disassociate themselves from a religious establishment that has encouraged this kind of violence, these kind of views about Westerners and any non-believers. But so far it hasn't happened, which is why you can shut down one particular group, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS, it keeps coming back, it keeps bopping back up. And why is that? Because the ideology continues to be spread, funded, financed, and encouraged. And that's where we have to fight the war.
All right, Fareed Zakaria. Fareed, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us. And if you're just joining us, there has been what is believed to be a terrorist attack in Manchester, England. We're getting video from social media of people pouring out of that concert, running for their lives after an explosion. 20 people dead, we know right now. They think the death toll may go up, and we will definitely inform you if that does happen. 59 people injured, 19 killed, I should say, 59 people injured at this Ariana Grande concert. 19 killed, 59 injured. I want to bring in now our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. He joins us now by phone. It is very early on in this investigation, Dr. Gupta. And again, I just want to report 59 people injured, 19 are dead. Also getting reports that shrapnel may have been used in this bomb, which would mean nails. What types of injuries do we usually see from situations like this?
Yeah, Don, we used to say that these were the types of injuries we'd only see on battlefields, but I think over the last few years now, that has changed. These are becoming civilian injuries that civilian hospitals have become too familiar with treating. What typically happens, is that you have sort of three waves, if you will, Don, of injury. A primary wave, which is the blast wave itself. It's basically the concussive blast wave that causes the first round of injuries. The second wave of injuries is typically shrapnel and debris, not necessarily from the explosive device, but everything is potentially shrapnel and debris in a situation like this. The third wave is sort of bodies moving, Don, bodies moving into bodies. Those are typically the three waves of injuries. Now, a couple points to make, and I think you may have said this earlier. The worst place, obviously, for an explosion like this to occur is in a very small, confined area, and the reason being that primary blast becomes magnified in a smaller area. Given that this was outside, obviously horrific as it's being described, but could have been much worse if it had been inside or in a smaller area. And also, I think, Don, even since you started the show, the numbers have gone up, 50 now to 59 people who are injured. That is not surprising. What typically happens in these types of explosion injuries is that there can be people out there, and people need to be mindful of this, that they may have injuries. Areas within their body may have been compressed by the explosive wave. They may not recognize the injury initially. They'll be going into the hospital over the next several hours, Don.
Yeah, and we spoke, Sanjay, to Karen Ford, who she and her husband had brought their daughter, a 13-year-old, to celebrate her birthday that evening. Lots of young people there. This audience is very young. If they weren't injured in this, there will be a mental health impact on the trauma for kids like this, for young children.
And no question. I think for the children, certainly, this was an area, obviously that they went to enjoy themselves. Parents relinquished control of their kids for a period of time here in pursuit of this enjoyment. And I'm a parent of 3 girls, Don, who are ages 12, 10, and 8. And every time you hear something like this, no matter where you are living in the world, it's frightening, and it's nothing obviously like what they're experiencing there right now.
Our chief medical correspondent is Dr. Sanjay Gupta, joining us to help us out on this story. Sanjay, we appreciate your expertise on this. We'll get back to Sanjay if we get more information on this. But again, British Constable holding a news conference at the top of this hour, just about 40 minutes ago, saying that they are investigating now this as a terrorist incident, asking for your help if you were there in the area to get in touch with police, asking people to stay away from the area, and again saying this is a terrorist event. I want to bring in now CNN's Max Foster. Max is joining us on the phone now, or is Max on the phone? Joining us now. This is currently being treated. There he is, not on the phone, he's on camera. Being treated as a terrorist attack. What more can you tell us from London about this incident, Max?
Well, we're in the midst of a general election campaign here, and the Prime Minister has said that that election campaign will be suspended. We expect all the main political parties to join forces with that. That allows her to chair a COBRA meeting, as it's called, an emergency meeting of senior government officials, but also security officials, which will take place down in Westminster here in London, we think at 9 a.m. local, that's 4 a.m. Eastern time. That will really be bringing together all the latest intelligence on this. It's being led from Manchester by the police there, but also senior counter-terrorism officers at the national level are coordinating here in London to see whether or not there's any intelligence that should suggest there might be any follow-up attacks, for example, and just to get to the bottom of what the motive here might have been, where the inspiration might have come from, Don.
Max, how are authorities reacting there? We heard from the Chief Constable moments ago. More reaction from authorities. What are you hearing?
Well, people really expressing their thoughts for the people involved here. We haven't got a definitive motivation here saying it is terror, but everyone's obviously investigating in that way. People are really feeling for the many people caught up in this. So lots of eyewitness testimony coming in. It seems to have happened just outside the arena where parents were gathering to pick up their kids. That's the narrative that keeps coming through. So they're dropping off their kids to go to the concert, picking them up and then seeing the blast. And then you had this horrific period of time where everyone was split up. Everyone was running in different directions from the stadium. They were told not to go back towards it. They were being pointed in particular directions by the police. And parents and friends just didn't know where their loved ones were. And a lot of them, sadly, are waiting for the horrific confirmation that their loved ones are dead.
Max Foster joining us from London. Max, thank you very much now. I need to get to this next person. And it's important that you sit down and listen to this and watch this, because Charlotte Campbell joins me by phone. Her daughter is missing tonight. Charlotte, you said your daughter is 15 years old. Her name is Olivia. Tell us what happened.
She went to the concert with her friend. Spoke to her just before 10 o'clock. She was enjoying herself. And we've not heard anything from her since. We've phoned hospitals, we've phoned everywhere we can think, we've posted it on every social network, and there's nothing, there's no news of her. She's now registered as a missing person.
Olivia?
Yeah.
Olivia is your daughter's name. She's 15 years old.
Yeah.
She is registered as a missing person. She was with her best friend, you said. His name is Adam. The hospital hasn't found her. And he's missing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not able to get her on the phone. It's going directly to voicemail?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. What are authorities telling you? Are they telling you anything?
They're not telling us anything. They're just registering them as missing people and telling us to wait by the phones.
Adam, her best friend's phone, you can't get through either.
No,
we can't as I understand, your husband, her father, went to looking for her. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you haven't
Yeah, but
heard
they've
anything.
just been put into a pub now and told to wait.
Yeah. And so when was the last time you spoke with Olivia, Charlotte?
I spoke to her at about 8:30 this evening.
Yeah. We're going to put her picture. There she is. We're putting her picture up on the screen for our viewers to see. What do you want people to know about what parents like you are dealing with tonight? I mean, I don't know if you can even put it into words.
I can't. It's the most horriblest feeling ever to know that your daughter's there. You can't find her. You don't know if she's dead or alive. And I don't know how people can do this to innocent children.
Yeah.
I can't. It's the most horriblest feeling. Your daughter's there. You can't find her. You don't know if she's dead or alive.
So I have to say, I think you have your television up in the background. If you don't mind turning it down. This.
Yeah, I'll set it down.
Hopefully, Charlotte, that is just her phone isn't working and Adam's phone isn't working, and you'll be able to get in touch with her. That is the hope tonight.
Yeah, I just want her home. I want her home and I want her safe.
At a concert with mostly teenage girls, horrific. One would wonder what kind of monster would want to do something like this if it does turn out to be terrorism or some sort of suicide bomb. Charlotte?
I have no idea what could go through their minds to want to injure innocent children. They're children. They haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah. Tell us about the children and going to this concert. She and Adam wanted to go to this concert. Obviously, was she the fan? Is Adam the fan? Or they're both fans?
Yeah, both great fans of her. It was a treat for Adam's birthday. And my daughter's been quite poorly lately, and Adam asked us to go as a treat for her as well. They've done nothing but talk about it, been excited for it, buying new clothes for it. You know, like normal teenage children, really, that are going to see one of their favourite artists. And it's ended in absolute carnage.
This is one reason it's so hard when your children, preteens and teens, to start letting them go off and do their thing.
She'll never be going out again. She'll never be going out my sight again.
And in moments like this, Charlotte, it's almost impossible to find words to speak with you and to even question you, because I can't imagine what you're going through. And as we looked at the video that's coming in through social media, you see all those parents who are standing out front of that arena, just hoping that their children are going to run down those steps and into their arms. And I'm sure at any moment, every single moment, you are awaiting Olivia to give you a call on the phone or to come walking into the door.
Yeah, that's all I want. I just wanted to walk through the door. Phone me, text me. If anyone sees her, contact me. It's all over social media. You can contact me anyway. I just want her found.
Yeah. If we can put Olivia's picture up again, and if anyone out there has seen Olivia, Olivia is 15 years old. Olivia Campbell, her mother Charlotte joins us now by phone. Her mother says she just wants her to come walking in the door or call, but her cell phone is not working. Olivia went to this concert, the Ariana Grande concert, with her best friend Adam. Adam's phone isn't working either. They can't get through to either phones. Charlotte said she spoke to Olivia just after 8 o'clock tonight, Manchester time, as she was getting ready to go to this concert as the concert was starting. But she says she has been missing since 10:30 London time, is registered as a missing person now. She has reached out to all the hospitals. Her father is out there looking for her now. And as I understand, Charlotte, you said that they have been telling people like Olivia's father to gather in a pub to wait for information, correct? What are they saying?
Yeah, they're to go to the Parkin pub in Manchester and just wait there for any information rather than walking the streets and going to hospitals because hospitals are just getting flooded with people. It's easier if everyone's in one place, then the police can contact them there.
And we have to say, I spoke to another mother earlier, Charlotte, who said it was just chaos and people were running in all different directions, and it is possible that she dropped her phone. And just now she doesn't, maybe at this moment she doesn't have a way, and Adam, they don't have a way to get in touch with anyone, again, because it was pure chaos outside of that arena.
Yeah, Olivia knows my number. If she can get to a phone, she'll ring me. I know she will.
Yeah. Charlotte, we're going to let you go now. And if we can help you in any way, will you please get in touch with us? And if you hear from Olivia or Adam, please let us know. But our thoughts are out to you. Our prayers will go out to you, and we're wishing the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's tough. I want to bring in now Jim Maxwell. Jim is a retired FBI special agent. Tom Fuentes is a CNN senior law enforcement analyst, and Bob Baer, CNN intelligence and security analyst. Thank you all for joining us. I mean, this is the most horrific of circumstances. And as our Juliette Kayyem pointed out, each victim, each life is all worth the same, but it seems more horrific when there are children involved in this, Tom. Law enforcement officials are telling CNN that the likely cause of this explosion is a suicide bomber. If you were part of this investigation, what exactly would you be looking for right now?
Well, actually, Don, they're looking at so many things. That's why they have so many hundreds of individuals working on this kind of case. Try to identify the individual, that if he is the suicide bomber, who is he, where is he from, who are his friends or colleagues or others that might also be assisting in this plot or planning other attacks. The explosive device itself, what were the chemicals used, how was it wired, how was it set up?
Tom, can you stand by just a moment, please? Pardon the interruption. New video of this attack, of this bombing. Take a look.
Oh my God. What's going on? What just happened? What's going on?
So that's the newest video. Again, more video coming in from social media, people taking video on their cell phones. And that is exactly what they will be using in this investigation. Probably initially they're looking, Tom, at cell phone video. Every video that is put out there, you heard the explosion in the background, and you can see people's reaction. That will definitely be part of the investigation.
Oh, absolutely. And you're also going to have a great deal of video coverage just around that arena, around the outside of it, that they might be able to pick up the individual going to the location or walking with whatever he was carrying, maybe a backpack or some other way to carry the device. So, that's a very arduous process to go through all those videos. It may take hours, it may take days to go through area videos, the train station nearby. There's many avenues of investigation that have to be covered here, and it's very difficult. So they'll divide the investigation up into teams that will deal with the bomber, the device, the videos of the event, social media, other coverage, any information from sources about threats that may have been placed in social media or published about that, any groups that they may have been watching that could be tied to this. So there's many avenues, and they all have to be covered at once as much as they possibly can, with the assistance of law enforcement and intelligence services from throughout the world. The FBI has a large office in London. They'll be assisting in looking at their intelligence and any information that they may have, as well as querying the worldwide network of law enforcement and intel services.
Yeah. Tom, thank you very much. I want to bring in now Jim. Jim, let's talk about the human aspect of this before we move on to talk about other things, because you hear from a mother like Charlotte talking about her daughter, Olivia, wanting to get information out there. These parents, everyone, family members, want as much help as they can possibly get, and right now they're reaching out to anyone, even the news media, to get the word out about their relatives who are missing, and they haven't heard from them.
Don, I can tell you that the demographic of this incident is particularly horrendous. Young children. This is a relatively new tactic. I can't imagine what the families and relatives of these children are going through right now. And also would point out the first responders. I can tell you in my career, anytime I had to deal with the death of a child, it's something that stays with you forever. And you know, that's going to be the aftermath of this event, people dealing with that. But this is the tactic of targeting this event after the event is significant in my eyes. Many times we go to these venues and they're very particular and there's a lot of scrutiny about people going into these events, but there's little or no scrutiny on people coming out of these events. And choke points like transportation centers, parking lots, large exits are primary targets. And this is a chess game. These people watch these events and they look for the weakest points.
Yeah. We are just getting, Bob, I need to say we're getting, Ariana Grande is tweeting now. I just want to put it up on the screen. She's saying, broken from the bottom of my heart, I am so sorry. I don't have words, and that is understandable. Bob, when speaking to that mother, I didn't have words as well. Obviously, that mother reached out to CNN because she wanted to get the information out about her daughter and her daughter's best friend. Ariana Grande saying there are no words tonight, and there are no words tonight, Bob Baer.
There are none at all. It's such a senseless act, attacking children who have no political connection with what's going on in the Middle East. I've seen these bombings in Israel, and it's without pity, and they intentionally target children. And that's part of the strategy. Their strategy is to kill children, to shock us, to get us to change our ways. What they don't realize, it just makes it worse for everybody. But these people, I've been up in those areas in Beeston and Manchester and interviewed them. They are completely isolated from British society, alienated like you can't believe, refused to talk to us. And during the two bombings, when so many more people were killed in the same fashion, they were indifferent. And again, I think we have to remember how easy it is to make these bombs. If this thing turns out to be acetone and peroxide, it's one person in a kitchen can make these things along with the detonator. You put in metal, shrapnel, and you can kill this many people, just one person. What we really need to know is if this is part of a bigger cell, because if it is, there could be more attacks. And the British are very good, but they're going to have to close this down very quickly for us.
National security analyst Juliette Kayyem also joins us again. And Juliette, you were the first one to bring up the aspect of the children here. Maximum impact, and that maximum impact is fear. And nothing strikes fear more than children and the vulnerability of children, parents. Any loved one can tell you that.
Right. So those who know Ariana Grande, you know, she's sort of fearless, and a lot of the girls who like her sort of emulate that fearlessness, but right now there's just a lot of fear. It is terrifying to think, as we all do, to send your child to the other side of a security point to have a good time and then not be able to see them on the other end. But that's the purpose here. And I always like to leave people with advice rather than a fear. You cannot stop all these things from happening, but thinking through family unification becomes of utmost importance as we do these public events. As summer comes along, we're coming to a long weekend. Think it through. Once you are with your child, that is all that matters. Every parent listening knows that. And my heart goes out to that mother, and I hope we can, I hope she finds her, and this one is just different. Stepping out of my analyst role, this one is horrifying.
Well, our thoughts and prayers go out to everyone involved, all the families and mothers and the fathers out there. And again, speaking to the mom tonight, Charlotte, I was at a loss for words as to what to say to her, and we hope that she is reunited with her daughter, and we hope that many more people are reunited with their families. Sadly, it won't happen for everyone, and that is the tragedy in all of this. I'm Don Lemon. I thank you so much for watching this hour. I want to turn it over to our live coverage now, my colleagues Jim Sciutto and Pamela Brown.
This is a CNN special report, and we're following two major breaking stories this hour. An apparent suicide bombing at a pop concert. The British Prime Minister is calling it an appalling terrorist attack. At least 19 people killed at a performance by Ariana Grande.
And the crisis at the White House continues to escalate tonight. CNN has now confirmed that President Trump called two of the nation's top intelligence officials, asking them to publicly deny any evidence of collusion between his campaign and Russia. I'm Pamela Brown.
And I'm Jim Sciutto. First to the horrific developments in the United Kingdom, where 19 people are dead, dozens more injured. Witnesses say a massive explosion rocked the Manchester Arena shortly after American pop superstar Ariana Grande had finished a performance. Law enforcement official tells CNN that a male at the scene has been identified now as a probable suicide bomber. Our Phil Black is in London. He's tracking the latest details. And Phil, what are British investigators saying at this hour?
Well, Jim, it was just after Ariana Grande had finished her performance in front of some 20,000 people. Much of that crowd began leaving the arena when there was a loud explosion that could be heard through the packed crowd. And the video that's been posted online captures some of the terror, the panic, the extraordinary emotion that was felt by that crowd. We know that, according to police, 19 people were killed. And according to local ambulance services, 59 people have been transported to a number of hospitals with a wide variety of injuries. The crowd, we know, was made up of teenagers, children, some with their parents. And it was a short time ago that Ariana Grande responded for the very first time to the events that took place outside her concert tonight. On Twitter, she said this: "Broken. From the bottom of my heart, I am so sorry. I don't have words." Police in Manchester have not commented formally on what they believe was actually responsible for the blast, but they say they are treating this as a terror investigation, Jim.
Phil Black in London there, and we talk about soft targets. This is the ultimate of soft targets. Young people and their parents leaving a concert in a public space.
That's right. Any parent who has a child and taken them to a concert, they can see themselves in that same position, walking out and something horrific like this happening. I want to talk to Zain Nabi. She is in Manchester. And Zain, my bad. Zain, if you would set the scene for us, because you've actually been talking to some of the eyewitnesses.
Yes, we've been around Manchester and particularly around the arena. Behind us, you see the car park. The police cordon prevents us from getting closer. Obviously, at the time of the attack that took place just before 10:35 p.m. local time in England, in Manchester here, there were 20,000 people streaming out of the arena. They were attending the Ariana Grande concert. At the time, there were a lot of people obviously out on the streets. Subsequently, since then, people have made their way homes. You've had hotels like the Crown Plaza and the Holiday Inn opening up their hotels and inviting people in. And you've also had local people assisting in any way they can. I managed to speak to a number of people who had actually been in the arena. One gentleman had been in the front row and he heard the explosion just as the concert ended. He managed to make his way onto stage and was actually assisted by Ariana Grande's bodyguard. He had a panic attack. He suffered an asthma attack and was rushed out. I spoke to another young lady who was making her way out with her younger sister at the time of the explosion. And at that time, she was near where it took place. And there were actually fatalities and injuries that have taken place around her. The latest from the Manchester police is that there have been 59 casualties. Of them, 19 people are dead, as we know.
All right, Zain, thank you very much, bringing us the latest there from Manchester. Now let's turn to our team of experts for more analysis. Peter Bergen, I want to bring you in. Obviously, the investigators are still trying to figure out what was behind this, who the bomber is. I'm told by a Western official they've identified a male as the bomber, but they're still more learning, trying to learn more about him. What is most striking to you?
Well, the thing I'd be looking for is what was the bomb made out of, because that leads you to a lot of conclusions. Now, this is the deadliest terrorist attack in the United Kingdom since July 7th, 2005. It's probably the first terrorist attack since then. And it's almost certainly a hydrogen peroxide bomb. Why do I say that? Because getting dynamite or ammonium nitrate to make those kinds of bombs, very, very hard to do now. And the signature of Al-Qaeda and ISIS are these kinds of bombs. So if it's a hydrogen peroxide bomb, where was it made? Because these are highly unstable. You need a commercial refrigerator, often to kind of store the chemicals because they're so unstable. They're very toxic. If you're kind of making these kinds of bombs, you're often wearing a gas mask. There's a whole kind of apparatus here that I would be looking for. We don't know if it's a hydrogen peroxide bomb, but it almost certainly is, I think, based on Al-Qaeda and ISIS or people influenced by them that we've seen in the past.
Just a quick follow-up really quickly. Would it be a lone wolf scenario, or how likely would that be for something like that, for a suicide bomber to make that?
I'm skeptical because of the lethality of the bomb. I mean, it's not impossible. I mean, we've had people in this country build hydrogen peroxide bombs and they've killed themselves. If we all got together around this table and tried to build one, it's difficult. You need training. I've actually been at bomb-making courses where people are building these things. It takes many hours. The proportions are very, very careful. So this is not something you can just like read on the internet and make usually by yourself.
So, Phil Mudd, I've spoken to British counter-terror officials repeatedly over the last several months, and they talk about a constant level of threat, and they talk about a number of plots thwarted in recent months. They're already on the highest level you can imagine there. You have an attack like this, a soft target which at the end of the day is difficult to prevent.
I would say impossible. Think of a couple things. If you think about the United States and what we've heard, for example, from the FBI director, investigations in all 50 states, thousands of cases, I would roughly estimate, I've worked with European security services, they're sitting on at least 10 times the threat per capita.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with resource allocation, you have questions about how many people I can follow, and the toughest question, intent. I'm looking at a subject saying I've got to choose between 100 people, which ones I have to cover. Within 2 weeks, that individual you decide not to cover may say, I'm transitioning from I'm interested in jihad to I'm going to go kill somebody, and you've got to be good enough to determine which of those people who are triggering you're going to follow.
The rule of thumb, I remember for the UK, is these are rough numbers. 200 cells, 2,000 suspected jihadis, 10,000 suspected supporters of jihadis. You don't have the manpower in a country like that. And we saw that in France, too, where they have so many thousands, they can't follow all of them, even if they have a suspicion.
And only that, but I mean, if you're looking at a situation like this, and Phil, I think you would know this from your own experience. I mean, to do a bombing, it probably looks like you would have some kind of support system. It's not a single actor is more likely to do something like using a car to mow down people, as you saw outside the Houses of Parliament a couple of weeks ago. So at this point, you know, from talking to law enforcement officials, their initial suspicion is that we're going to see the high likelihood here that this person had a support system, probably had some kind of training, as Peter Bergen was mentioning, and so there's a lot more here to get to the bottom of.
And Tom, how concerning is this for U.S. law enforcement?
Well, it's very. I mean, all law enforcement in the world is understaffed when it comes to trying to track all the people that they have high suspicion of that may do something. So they have to narrow that down. They can't follow everybody. And, you know, rely as much as possible on intelligence, on individuals cooperating in the community to tell them of suspicious persons, and electronic capability. And of course, then we have the other argument in a free society about civil liberties. Do we want, you know, metadata being stored? Do we want NSA wiretapping international calls? All of that type of thing kicks back in. So it's very concerning.
A question, and we don't know yet because it's early, a question that's going to be addressed, and I'm sure they're already working on, is, was this inspired or directed? Was this someone who, reading online, became self-radicalized, maybe found some of the, you know, the recipes, in effect, for the bombing online, or if they had some sort of contact at home? I mean, the truth is, both of those is unsettling and alarming in its own way, right? Because you know, the self-radicalized are harder to track, and the directed ones means that there's a line back to the war zones in Syria or the organizations themselves.
Well, in a way, they've directed all of their followers all over the world to do it. So they don't have to micromanage, you know, each individual case, or have this person under, you know, calling him and saying, are you ready? Do it today. They're on their own. They dispatch them like zombies.
Although, I mean, the question is, was there involvement where they said led them to a particular target or this kind of thing?
And was there anything, Peter Bergen, anything recently coming from ISIS, which we know has been calling on followers in Europe, that's a big concern, to launch terrorist attacks? Anything recently that could have prompted this?
Hamza bin Laden, Osama bin Laden's son, called for these kinds of attacks relatively recently. And ISIS has constantly called for them. But look, you know, one thing is, you know, like school shooters look at other school shootings. And so here we have an attack at a concert hall, which is similar to Bataclan in Paris. Also, I think it's significant that it was an American star that was performing, just as it was an American band in Paris. So there's certainly sort of a copycat element here. You know, Jim's raised a question, inspired, directed, enabled, or trained. That's a sort of the spectrum. We've had 850 Brits go to get training in Syria. 200 of them are supposed to have come back. We don't know if this is, you know, we obviously don't know at this time, but the Brits are being pretty lucky, I think, so far. They've arrested a lot of people.
We've heard from them that, you know, certainly you guys have both heard from British officials. MI5 says that, you know, they have hundreds of these guys that have come back, and as ISIS gets pressured in Iraq and Syria, more of them are coming back, and they're very particularly worried about them going to concentrating in places like Manchester and the Midlands and in London, because that's where there's a support network.
And it just reminds you that in the view of these terrorists, no one is off limits. Clearly the target here was women and children.
Yeah. Phil, what's happening now? It's our reporting, it's Pam and Evan's reporting that they have an ID on who they believe to be the suicide bomber. They're now, I imagine, looking at his connections, who might have supported him, raiding houses. Walk us through what the law enforcement process is now.
You've got law enforcement intelligence, 3 tiers here. The first tier is, are there co-conspirators? I'm not worried about what happened 3 hours ago. That's grieving. That's not investigative. The question is, are there co-conspirators who were involved in the attack tomorrow? That's looking at what apartments did he rent, where'd the money go to, where'd he travel. The most critical element, communications. I want a cell phone, I want a laptop, because I can tell instantly who he talked to. Second tier would be who provided money, who radicalized, in essence, support network. Then finally, you're looking weeks, months down the road, is there a tether that goes back someplace else? Yeah. Might be Western Europe, might be Syria. Can we get enough information that might lead to a raid in 6 months, 9 months against a safe house in Syria among the people who might have been involved in this?
And are there follow-on attacks, right? I mean, you got to be worried in a couple hours the people are going to be going to work in London, the subways there, whether or not there could be other people who might be waiting in the wings to do something just like this. At other soft targets.
And when you look at other attacks, we've all covered the Paris attacks, for instance. Those cell phones were key sources of intelligence. Find other contacts, look for, I imagine, and Tom, you have enormous experience in this category, look for how big the web grows, if indeed there is a web, because there's also a possibility of a lone actor.
You know, Jim, one of the biggest issues we saw in the other European attacks, Paris and in Brussels, were that in those neighborhoods, the police had almost no contact with the people. They were very isolated neighborhoods, so they had a difficult time getting cooperation. And you could argue one way or the other whose fault that might be, but they really had isolated communities that had been there for a couple of generations and not really assimilated into French or Belgian society. So the question now is Manchester in a similar situation? Do we have, you know, isolated neighborhoods where people don't feel like they're British or assimilated? They still feel like foreigners in, you know, the United Kingdom. So we haven't heard that part of this yet, of what the police relationships are in those neighborhoods.
Possible, though. You also have you have the profile of the folks who were the average local teenagers, right? I mean, you have that in UK, you have it here, who were assimilated and then took this path.
But one thing that's striking is, you know, the ISIS attacks in Europe have really been a francophone phenomenon, right? It's Belgium and Paris. All these people went through the Belgian prison systems, the French prison systems. We haven't really seen it in Britain. I think, you know, Britain is partly protected by the Channel, partly protected by a very good intelligence service, and maybe a little bit of luck. You know, unfortunately, this is kind of a new development that it's, you know, pretty worrisome, because, I mean, for a while, you know, we have seen a lot of Brits go to Iraq and Syria for training, but they're much, you know, the numbers of French or Belgium is much larger.
And the British do seem to have a better handle. I think what Tom is talking about is definitely a problem in Belgium. In the UK, we keep hearing from them that they've certainly done a better job of trying to at least infiltrate and try to make sure they can keep an eye on those people that are coming back. But as you said, you know, you never know where there's one that's hiding.
It's a resource problem.
Right.
All right,
well, I'll tell you
so much.
When I ask people their top threats, intel officials, they'll often put at the top list terrorism and Russia. And tonight is a night where we have developments, sadly, in both categories.
We certainly do. We have some